Hey guys, how are all of you beautiful people? Hope all of you are doing great. This is in Marvel I Am God. Were Endless transmigrated the timeline of Wolverine 3 and became the last mutant of the old era. At the moment, the X-Men have long since disbanded, Mutant is no longer brilliant, Wolverine is entering old age, and the entire race is in peril. Fortunately, he found that when he watched battles he could obtain the opponent's abilities. So let's start this story, relax and enjoy. Metropolis. Although the crime rate of the city is not as good as Gotham, it is definitely the most well-known city in the DC universe, and the first superhero in history was born here. It is also one of the important cities of America, and its historical status is far from that of New York City in the Marvel Universe, where many big events take place. But at the moment Superman wasn't born yet. At the moment, the sky is just dawning. Apartments near Metropolitan University. A cramped room. Jingle bell. The alarm time is set at 6:30 and a crisp sound in the head, echoing in the room. Clark. Kent woke up immediately, rubbed his eyes and got out of bed, sitting on the edge of the bed without knowing what he was thinking, but kept his eyes closed. He noticed that something was getting wrong with his body, and it seemed to grow with age. Since he was a child, he has had abnormalities in his body, and sometimes everything will start to become transparent with just a slight hit in front of him. Sometimes he was even able to look through other people's bodies and see their flesh and blood internal organs. This also made Clark Kent cause great psychological damage since he was a child, but he did not dare to mention it to others, for fear that the other party would think that he had a mental problem. And, lately, he has noticed that his hearing has also improved, and he can hear the whispers of others hundreds of meters away. He even experimented with how he could hear the sound of others exercising a few blocks away while fully focused. Oh! When I think of this, Clark Kent couldn't help but shake his head and sigh. In fact, he had already gone to the hospital for a physical examination, and the results indicated that he was completely fine. Definitely. In the process of physical examination, there was also a small episode. That's when the hospital nurse was giving Clark. When Kent took blood, he found that the needle could not pierce the latter's blood vessels, and the skin on his arm was as tough as cowhide. Or Clark Kent took matters into his own hands and barely completed the blood collection. I don't know if such a change is good or bad. Clark Kent sat on the edge of the bed and pondered for a long time, then he was ready to slowly open his eyes. He stood up and walked to the window, looking at the rising early sun, feeling the sun shining on his body. There was always an inexplicable sense of comfort. From small to big Clark. One of Kent's favorite things to do is to bathe the whole person in the sun, which makes him extremely relaxed. After looking at it for a while, Clark Kent rubbed his head and turned to the bathroom to wash up. Then I went to the kitchen, fried an egg to heat 2 slices of bread, got a glass of milk, and prepared myself a simple breakfast. After coming to Metropolis from his farm home to prepare for college, he has been taking care of himself. Right in Clark Kent ate his breakfast, slowly out of his mind. All kinds of voices around him suddenly flooded into his mind like a tide. Feeling the huge amount of information squeezed into his mind in one breath, he was frightened and quickly focused on controlling his hearing. I have other uses for this last room, I don't plan to rent it, you better find another place to live. Then Clark Only then did Kent notice a noise coming from outside the nearby door. It seems that the mean landlady has an argument with someone again. Realizing this, he shook his head with a wry smile. Clark. Since Kent came to live in this apartment, he has heard of such things happening more than once. Even he himself had been criticized by the landlady for returning too late. If it weren't for the landlord's statement that the rent refund was not refundable, and he happened to be shy, Clark would have wanted to move out of here at that time. I don't know why she had a dispute with others this time. As the mind progressed here, Kent suddenly became curious about the door and looked towards it. Next second, he suddenly felt uncomfortable in his eyes, blinked slightly, but did not expect to see through the wall directly when he opened his eyes again. I saw a yellow-skinned boy standing in the corridor across a door, talking to the landlady about renting. He wants to rent a room here. But Kent looked at the landlady's posture and did not seem to intend to do what the other party wanted. I advise you not to continue wasting your tongue. I will not rent you the only room left in the end. The landlady, who is more than 100 years old, is full of fat like a bucket, pinching her waist and being high-spirited, and her eyes behind her sunglasses are full of meanness. This lady, I think we still have room to discuss this issue, and I don't care about adding more rent. The boy had a smile on his face and was very insistent on the issue of renting a house. Kent noticed this and shook his head with a smile. When he first arrived, he also wanted to go and rent the newly renovated room. But the landlady resolutely refused on the grounds that it is impossible to rent a new house to young people who don't know how to cherish it. No way. Sure enough, the landlady opposite the teenager shook her head and insisted, no matter how much money you pay, I won't rent you the room. Oh. This lady, I think a kind person like you must not bear that I can't rent a suitable room and affect my studies, right? After being rejected, the yellow-skinned boy looked a little distressed, and a strange light flashed under his slightly squinted eyes. With the fluctuation of one of the invisible, it spreads. But watching everything Kent, not noticing an intangible psychic wave emanating from the teenager, enveloped the landlady in front of him. He raised his eyebrows and muttered to himself, I have also used this set of praise and miserable rhetoric, and this woman will calmly accept your praise, but she will still refuse. 5. However, the situation outside the door changed and then came to Kent's expectations. You're right, I'm really kind. Moreover, if it is not a good thing to rent a suitable house, it will affect your studies. 35. The landlady's frown suddenly unfolded after she said the general, forget it, then the room will be rented to you, you must take good care of it. The yellow-skinned boy smiled and thanked him, and then prepared to pay the rent. Kent's expression was a little surprised when he saw this. Meanwhile, the well-proportioned and slightly slender boy outside the door with a beautiful face was Endless, who had just arrived at the metropolis. I didn't expect to rent a room here, you need to use the ability of the mind to solve. Having just paid 3 months of rent, he looked at the landlord in front of him and was helpless. And the landlord unexpectedly felt that the more he looked at Endless, the more he felt that this teenager looked extraordinarily cordial. After taking out the key and handing it to him, he enthusiastically took Endless to see the room. Not bad. Endless looked at the room he rented. Indeed, as the other party said, it was just renovated 2 bedrooms and 1 living room, and then nodded with satisfaction. Although he can return to Marvel World at night, it will be more convenient to have his own place to stay here. Definitely needs to have a foothold here, and more importantly, here is the future of Super Kent. This can not only increase the opportunity for you to contact with each other, but also facilitate more opportunities to obtain superb ability. In the end, Endless's appearance in the metropolis is entirely because of Dakeo. The mind goes on and on. The landlady standing at the door seemed a little reluctant. Endless, if you need any trouble in the future, you can also come to me at any time. Click. At this time, the door opposite the room was pushed open. Hello. A tall 19-12-year-old young man walked out, wearing square-rimmed glasses revealing Confucian's Swen, and saw Endless say hello raw. Endless saw Clark. Kent was slightly stunned. The reason why he chose to rent in this apartment is because he knows that the other party is here. Different due to the big superpower in different periods, the young segment of awakening ability has a gap. 99. I don't know this Clark of the universe. Kent, what stage has awakening reached? He couldn't help but think in his heart, and at the same time said hello to the other party in a friendly manner. Endless, this is Clark. Kent. At this time, the landlord warmly introduced the other party to Endless. This is Endless, the new tenant opposite you. Then towards Clark. Kent introduced Endless. Clark. After Kent knew the other party's name, he smiled and nodded, and then looked at Endless with some strangeness. Unexpectedly, the landlord refused to rent his room before, and actually rented it to the other party so easily. But he didn't care too much. After a casual chat, Clark. Kent was about to take his leave. I'm going to report to the university. Today is my first day of class, so I can't be late. 39. Clark, are you taking classes at Metropolitan University? Endless asked suspiciously when he heard this. Yes. Clark. Ken nodded, and at the same time his eyes lit up and hesitated. Are you too? It seems that we are actually alumni, and I also came to school on my first day. You wait a little for me to put things away, and we'll go over together. Endless laughed. Good. Clark. Kent also laughed after making sure that the other party was his alumnus. He didn't expect to meet alumni, and he also hoped to have another friend. Thereupon, when Endless went back to put his things away, because the residence was close to the school, the two chose to walk to the school together. On the road. How did you choose to travel so far to the metropolis? The university in Gotham should be no worse than here. When Clark. Kent was a little surprised to learn that Endless was from Gotham. After all, it was a famous city. That place is full of crazy people, no one knows your doorstep, and whether there will suddenly be another corpse of unknown origin the next day. Endless shook his head and shrugged his shoulders, his words full of sighs, and he said it as if it were true. There are only crazy people and normal people in the world. Clark. Kent made a joke when he heard this. Yet at this very moment, the two of them walked for a while, and a few gangsters suddenly walked out of the roadside. Hey, two college students, to celebrate your admission, don't you mind if we take some money for alcohol? The leader walked in the front with a sly smile, and his tone was frivolous zero. He wears a vest, tattoos on his arms and neck, and is very skillfully dancing a butterfly knife in his hand, which is dazzling. While this guy is talking, the other gangsters had already separated tacitly and surrounded Endless and the two. Looks ready to wrap them before and after. Endless was not surprised to see this. After all, although the major crime rate in the metropolis is not as good as Gotham, there are still countless criminals. Robberies like this are everywhere. However, he did not rush to the gangster in front of him. He wanted Clark. Kent intervened to solve this matter so that he could get the ability in the latter. In a moment of thought, he set his sights on the latter. Although Endless' strength is now completely beyond ordinary people, after all, Captain America is a little slender from the outside. And Clark. Even if Kent does not mention super ability, he is tall and burly just by looking at his body shape. In such a situation, how can he strike first? Pity. Obviously, Endless overestimated the KO of this period, and he is now just a fledgling young man, and the childishness on his face has not dissipated. On the first day of school, face a few punks. Clark Kent doesn't want to cause trouble. As for breaking the fortune, he had money in his wallet, but only a few changes, just to prevent this. The punk leader searched his whole body, and his face was a little disgusted. Boy! What young man would go out with only a few dollars? The gangster leader was a little dissatisfied and stuffed his wallet back into Clark's pocket. Clark, you. Endless felt a little speechless watching this scene happen. Then he sighed secretly and took a step forward and pinched the wrist of the gangster leader holding the money. I always think that your money is too easy to earn, and I have to let you taste what life is beating. 35. He frowned slightly, stared at the other party and said, let's just say you're nowhere near as smart as your friend, and you're a little too bold. The gangster leader looked at Endless' slightly slender figure, first smiled disdainfully, and then his face instantly darkened. Because he found that the other party's arm was obviously thinner than his, but the palm was like a strong iron tong. No matter how hard he tried, he never waved at all. Fuck. The gangster leader cursed angrily, and the butterfly knife in his other hand was angry and pierced directly towards Endless' abdomen. And Endless also clenched his fist at this time. Boom. There was a muffled sound. The gangster leader only felt like he was hit head-on by a high-speed truck, and the terrifying pain instantly spread from the abdomen to the whole body, and the whole person flew directly upside down 2 or 3 meters away. Damn. What's going on with this guy? Big brother, are you all right? Shit, let's solve this ignorant guy first. The other gangsters saw this scene, their eyes were cloudy, and they quickly leaned up to surround Endless. Joke. Even if this skinny yellow-skinned boy is weird, but just because the other party is timid with a punch, then they don't have to mix. You guys, none of you 3.0 people are smart, no wonder you have fallen to this point. Endless' size did not fluctuate, and the corners of his mouth showed a smile with mockery. As soon as he said this, all the gangsters around him were immediately enraged. You kid is looking for death. Some gangsters scolded angrily, and others directly picked up street weapons such as finger tigers, chains, baseball bats, etc., and started their hands without saying a word. Pity. Endless didn't even pay attention to Hydra's trained special forces and the powerful gangsters. Not to mention a few street gangsters. I saw him tossing and turning, and those gangsters couldn't even touch the corner of his clothes. And every punch and kick Endless can make a gangster lose his mobility, which is the result of his control of power at 5%. But a dozen seconds of time. All the gangsters lay on the ground, curled up in a ball and groaned in pain, and even mixed up directly. Endless, I didn't expect your strength to be so strong. Clark. Kent's face was shocked. He didn't expect to meet a neighbor who could fight so well. This surprised him a little. Your strength is much stronger than mine. 35. Endless couldn't help but complain in his heart when he heard this. It is said that you Orientals will know mysterious kung fu, really powerful. Clark. Kent then sighed. Let's hurry up and go to class. When Endless heard this, he was even more speechless. At the same time, he thought to himself, judging by Clark's performance just now, his Superman ability should not be completely awakening during this period. Coupled with the living environment since he was a child, let him become a good man. With thinking, Endless squinted his eyes slightly, and began to think in his heart. Whether to force Dakeo to do it. Just a rush move. I don't know if he can take on a few tricks of this period. After what had just happened on the road, Kent unconsciously quickened his pace, and Endless followed him to the Metropolitan University soon. America's university is similar to the university in Endless' previous country. There are many new student reception points set up at the school gate, and there will be seniors in the student union who are responsible for guiding new students. The difference is that they just need to report today. It is sufficient to go through various admission procedures. The senior who brought them was named Bob, a yellow-skinned and optimistic man. Along the way, he actively introduced the school's facilities, as well as the school's history and culture. Finally, after all the formalities, Bob suddenly remembered something and said, "There will be a party welcoming new students in the West Campus cafeteria tonight. Do you want to come together then?" "No problem, we didn't have anything else to do for the 2 nights anyway." 99. Endless said and looked at Clark next to him. Kent. He really has nothing to do, not to experience American college life, but to superbly compete. Hearsay. Clark. After thinking for a while, Kent nodded and said, "Anyway, I don't have anything else to do at night, but I can go and take a look." When he first arrived, he naturally wanted to contact more people. Great. Bob saw that both of them agreed to come down, and continued with a smile, "There will be the best wine and music tonight, and the most important thing is that there will be the hottest dressed senior sister. I believe you will definitely not regret it then." 5. A lot of people's first college encounters are at parties like this. His eyes were a little confused as he spoke. At last, Bob took Endless and the two to the teaching office to submit all the materials, which is considered to be the final procedure. By the way, although most American schools are not mandatory to participate in military training, I still recommend that you choose to participate in the end. When Bob walked out of the teaching office, he mentioned in passing about entering the military training. "This is good for you." "Well, I came to a new city to integrate into a new life, and I will participate." Clark. Kent nodded hearing this. Endless when he heard these words. Clark came to mind. Since he was a child, Kent has been regarded as a freak by those around him because of his difference. So after coming to the metropolis, I naturally want to make 03 changes. Since the senior said so, I also felt the need to participate. In thought, Endless spoke up. Definitely attributed it to Clark. Kent. Since the latter also wanted to participate in military training, he naturally planned to go with him. Subsequently, several people chatted casually all the way to the school gate, and Bob said goodbye to the two and continued to help the other freshmen who came to report with enthusiasm. Clark. Kent said he was prepared to walk around the campus and then familiarize himself with the surroundings. After all, they will all live in this place for years to come. However, Kent had just walked to the sports field when he was attracted by a figure. "Hey, Lana, I didn't expect to meet you here." When he saw the familiar silhouette clearly, he unconsciously cracked a smile at the corner of his mouth, and raised his hand to greet Raw. Ha! The girl turned her head to look at Raw when she heard the call, first stunned, then also smiled. Clark. She recognized Clark. Kent immediately took a brisk step and ran over. Long time no see. The girl ran to Clark. Kent hugged each other enthusiastically in front of him, and the smile on his face became brighter. Long time no see. Clark. The big boy in Kent suddenly became a little shy because of this warm hug, and gently reached out to pull away the childhood sweetheart on his body. You're still the same. 95. Noticing the boy's embarrassment, the girl smiled and patted the latter on the shoulder. Let me think about how long we haven't seen each other. It's been 4 years since your family moved out of town. Clark. Kent touched his nose, obviously remembering this matter well, and then he introduced the other party to Endless. Endless, this is Lana, my friend. We've known each other since childhood. Hello, my name is Endless, I'm Clark's friend, you can call me Endless. Endless smiled and reached out to introduce himself. He definitely knows Lana. This girl is with Clark. Kent grew up with childhood sweethearts, and in a universe she even injected Superman blood and became a female Superman. My name is Lana and it's a pleasure to meet you. 35. Lana shook Endless' hand and turned to look back at Clark. Kent, always with a smile on his face, I'm so happy for you to see that you can meet friends on the first day of school. 95. Clark. Kent had a smile on his face since Lana appeared, and his eyes barely left the latter. He has always been silently fond of Lana. It's a pity that because of the inferiority in his heart, he has not been able to show it, and he dare not show it. Right at this moment. Hey, baby, it looks like you're having a great time. Someone stopped Lana behind him. This is Clark. Kent was slightly stunned when he heard the familiar behind him. Before he could turn around, he felt a heavy hit on his shoulder, and a figure walked past him. The man walked all the way to Lana and took the other's hand as if declaring, you know, it's inevitable to feel joy to meet old friends. Lana looked at each other with sweet eyes, and as soon as she finished speaking, she raised her head and gently caught the kiss from the other party. Whitney. 35. Clark. Kent looked at the scene in front of him, the corners of his mouth immediately fell, and his expression began to be a little ugly. He recognized Lana as his high school classmate Whitney, who had not had a good relationship in high school, and even had a bad relationship. And yet now, he actually got along with his childhood sweetheart. Clark, you kid still looks unlikable. Gone. Whitney raised her head and spoke in an unkind tone with Clark. Kent said hello to Raw, then pulled up Lana and turned away. I'll go first, and I'll talk later when I have time. Lana followed behind Whitney and looked back a little apologetic. She realized that her boyfriend was actually with Clark. Kent knew, and it seemed, that the relationship between the two parties was not good. Clark. Kent forced a smile, then stood frozen in place and watched Lana and the two gradually walk away. Clark, you're no worse than that Whitney. Endless next to him said in a deep voice. I'm a freak, growing up. A lot of times I don't have the power to choose. Clark. Kent shook his head, his eyes were slightly bitter, looked deeply at Endless and did not say much. Now that he has changed to a new environment, he just wants to try not to expose his differences, otherwise this new friend in front of him will also avoid him far away like everyone else. And clear Clark. Endless, who thought Kent, couldn't help but complain in his heart. According to Dakeo's ability, in fact, the definition of a freak is not up to him. It can only be blamed that Dakeo is too kind. If he is changed to some beautiful guy, the Whitney who offends him may die on the street the next day. Thinking, Endless wondered if he should enlighten the other party. But want to let Clark. It is obviously difficult for an upright person like Kent to have evil thoughts. In many periods, the Supermaster always gives people an innate sense of justice. Clark of this universe in front of you. The same is true of Kent, who exudes an unusual sense of righteousness. How do you get him to start changing ahead of time? Raw. Just as Endless was lost in thought, he suddenly heard a tearing air sound from the side, and subconsciously stretched out his hand. In a blink of an eye, a rugby ball was being caught in his hand. Endless. Your reflexes are really fast. Next to Clark. Kent was stunned, withdrew the hand that was just about to be stretched out, and sighed with some surprise. The Oriental man in front of him had only been in contact for half a day, and the latter had already done a lot of things that surprised him. Hey, you're two freshmen. At this time, on the rugby field not far away, a figure trotted over. The other party was a middle-aged man in a coach uniform, with an apologetic look on his face. Sorry, the training just now was too intense. It's okay. Endless smiled and didn't blame the other party too much, and casually threw the football back. Thank God, fortunately there were no serious consequences. The middle-aged man took the ball, immediately breathed a sigh of relief, and then looked Endless up and down. You just reacted very quickly, even a little too quickly, and on the rugby you would be a good player. My name is John, I'm the coach of the varsity rugby team. I wonder if you're interested in trying the sport of rugby. Coach John revealed his identity and showed a strong interest in Endless' size. This is a passionate and bloody sport. I believe that as long as it is a man, try it, you will definitely like it. 5. Then, he looked at Clark on the side. Kent, you're big, even better suited to rugby than your friends, and I really hope you can try it too. In fact, after seeing that Endless was okay just now, Coach John, who was relieved, set his sights on Clark. Kent on. At the end of the day, rugby is a sport that requires intense physical confrontation. Without knowing Endless' ability, it still seems a little thin just to look at the figure. After all, rugby is a sport that values physical fitness. Coach John invited him out loud, but out of politeness just missed. The former was more interested in Clark. Kent on. And Endless listened to Coach John's words, just smiled and didn't say much. Even if you don't talk about the ability of the heart, with the experience of being a person in 2 lifetimes, he can see the calculation in the other party's heart. As for Clark, Kent seemed a little hesitant after hearing the other party's invitation. After all, his ability is too strong. Compared with ordinary people, it is not in the same dimension at all, and it is simply a bully to go to the arena. No problem. 35. Right in Clark. When Kent was about to say no, Endless next to him agreed. Definitely he didn't decide for Clark, but he was sure that Clark would agree. Really? Clark on the side saw him going. His expression was a little hesitation, and he said slowly, "Okay, we will go together tomorrow. I hope to see you on the field tomorrow." Coach John said with a smile. To receive a player with great physical abilities like Clark is definitely a good thing for his team. The team will assemble at 8 a.m., so remember to come over tomorrow. He was afraid of Clark. Kent repented, and immediately said a lot in one breath. Tab. Big boy Clark. Kent is really not good at socializing, so he had to nod in the face of enthusiastic coaches. Endless, who was next to him, said, "You said that you have few friends. I think this will be a good opportunity." Hear this. Clark. Kent hesitated, and also felt that what Endless said made sense. He recalled the days when he was ostracized by everyone and alone, and suddenly felt that he should also make a new change. Then the two briefly communicated with Coach John, who once again emphasized the assembly time and left in a hurry, apparently with other things to do. As for Endless and Clark, Kent, on the other hand, continues to walk around campus. I have to say that Metropolitan University, even the main campus, is big enough. The two just walked around, and it was almost noon when they were over. So, Endless and they went to the school cafeteria for lunch again with 513. Then I walked out of the school gate, intending to turn back to the apartment building. The apartment building is located in a relatively remote location, but the housing prices there are the cheapest and it is relatively close to the metropolis. Endless. Alas! When you come to an intersection that is sparsely populated. Clark. Kent remembered Lana's back when she was taken away by Whitney. Immediately, he looked at Endless, a new friend, and wanted to stop talking. For this first friend after coming to the Met, Clark. Kent always felt that although the total time they had been in contact with was less than half a day, the teenager in front of him always gave him a comfortable feeling everywhere. It was as if they had known each other for a long time. This makes Clark. Kent had a feeling of wanting to talk to Endless about his troubles. Unfortunately, after this idea circled in his mind, a scene from the past immediately appeared in front of his eyes. That freak voice reverberates clearly in my ears to this day. Clark. Kent sighed and decided to give up. After all, he was really not sure whether the teenager in front of him, after knowing his ability, would also avoid him like everyone else. Clark, what's wrong? Endless, who had been paying attention to each other, naturally noticed that the person next to him looked like he wanted to talk and stop. It's okay. Clark. Kent smiled wryly, shook his head and said nothing. Then, on the road behind them, a truck drove up. You can see that the truck is not traveling fast, because its cargo compartment is full of extremely heavy building materials. Boom! Suddenly there was a bang. One of the wheels of the huge truck suddenly burst a tire, and the truck loaded with heavy goods lost its balance in an instant, and the whole body shook violently. Damn it! The black driver's face changed drastically, because he felt that the steering wheel in his hand had lost his control. The huge truck instantly swayed left and right on the road, like a runaway beast. What's more, the huge amount of the car slammed into the front of the car, and it was the teenager who was walking on both sides of the road and crashed over. Damn! Damn it! Damn it! The black driver roared, but he couldn't change anything. The truck suddenly lost control when it was only a few meters away from the two teenagers. If it is an ordinary person, such a close distance is completely unreactable, and even if you can't react alive, you can't do anything reacting, and the death is certain. But the two teenagers, one was Endless and the other was Clark. Kent. Endless had already reacted when the truck lost control of the tire and rushed towards this side. It's just that when the body just reacted, it was controlled by him. Because he noticed Clark. Kent had already blocked himself in advance. Thorn one by one. A huge truck carrying heavy cargo, a front wheel suddenly burst out of control and threw it towards the side of the road. The black driver, slammed on the brakes in horror, but everything happened too fast, even though all the wheels were already locked by the brakes. Under the huge amounts of inertia, the entire body still threw sideways towards the two teenagers on the side of the road. Damn! Clark! Kent noticed this scene and cursed secretly. With his ability, he can easily avoid this impact. But in his opinion, Endless beside him is just an ordinary person. If he dodged and let the truck crash, then he would not survive. There is no time to think too much, and there is no room to worry about the problems you have exposed. Clark! Almost instinctively, Kent chose to take a step forward and block Endless. Clark! Endless, who was about to dodge away, was also deliberately controlled, and the whole person stopped in place. There was no panic in his eyes when he looked at this scene, only surprise. Endless didn't know the verdict of combat copy ability. But the previous Cat-Omen ability, theft ability, can be copied. That means, perhaps, I can harvest the ability that belongs to Dakeo next. Endless' eyes lit up, and a glimmer of expectation flashed in his heart. Boom! The thought is not lost. The truck was already carrying a terrifying impact and slammed into Clark on its side. Kent's body. But the latter is rock solid. The huge impact that was enough to easily crush all the flesh and blood was like hitting a huge steel wall, and the cargo compartment of the car was destroyed in an instant. Carrying a terrifying impact, the wagon compartment made of metal touches Clark. Kent's body was like a shallow piece of paper hitting a stone, instantly shape-shifting and twisting. And in addition to the dense cracks spreading out of the ground under his feet, Kent himself has never wavered. It was as if it was not a runaway van that hit him, but an insignificant breeze. Battle detected, drop reward, Superman. Meanwhile, Endless' mind also sounded the cold prompt he was expecting. Ability replication successful. He felt that the density of all the skin, muscles, bones, and internal organs of his body was rapidly increasing, and his heart was happy. It's a pity that there are only bodies of steel. Then Endless thought about those heaven-defying abilities that Dakeo had, and he couldn't help but smack his lips. Aware of his thoughts, Endless shook his head. How do you feel? A little insatiable. Forget it, anyway, if you come to Japan, you will always copy all the abilities of Dakeo in the future. 5. Thoughts fall. Endless came to his senses, looked at the scene in front of him, and raised his eyebrows. I saw Clark. Kent was still like an unshakable statue, standing in front of him. Even the slightest movement was no different from before the car crashed. However, the ground under his feet was also covered with dense cracks because of the huge impact just now. As for Clark, the carriage in front of Kent can be described as tragic. The entire body, after the impact just now, has completely twisted and lost its shape. Like a churro that had been punched from the middle, it was distorted. Endless glanced at the cab. I saw that the black driver was wrapped in an airbag, and his life was not much in danger, but he also passed out because of the huge impact of the car accident. Roar. Endless. Are you all right? Clark. Kent blocked such a terrifying impact, and seemed to take 2 steps back with some difficulty, getting out of the cargo package. Stand in place and gasp. The impact just now seemed a little difficult for him in the early stage. I'm okay, Clark. Are you all right? Endless replied hesitantly, I'm lucky to have you, otherwise I'm afraid I would have become a pile of slag by now. 35. At the same time, he also felt that Clark of this period Kent is nowhere near as strong as it was a few years later. The body of steel that has just been copied gives him a body density that is not as perverted as imagined. Forget it, at least it's better than nothing. This disappointed Endless, who copied to a strong ability entirely on who he was copying. Since now Clark. When Kent was not at his peak, Endless' own steel body was far less than the peak. But one more ability is better than no ability at all. Endless. I hope I didn't scare you. Wait until everything is quiet. Clark. Kent also calmed Raw and walked up to Endless with a worried face. He had always been worried that the friends he had just made would reject him because of his ability like everyone else. It's just that I didn't expect that when I was struggling with whether to tell each other, everything happened so quickly. Definitely. Clark. Kent's concerns, if for others, exist. But Endless standing in front of him was different. The latter is probably the person who knows him best in the world, but Endless is even more because he knows Clark. Kent's ability just came closer to each other. Clark, do you have abilities beyond anyone else and look sad? Endless heard Clark. Kent's words laughed, don't worry, I never think that the strong are freaks. Clark. When Kent heard Endless' words, his eyes lit up slightly, and then he felt a little disbelieving. But for so many years, many people, except my parents, rejected me as a freak. 35. As he spoke, his expression fell slightly. When he was a child, he played ball with other people and couldn't control his power very well. Kent, who would accidentally burst the ball, has since become more and more alienated from him. Still young Clark. Kent even poked his hand with a pen in anger, but the pen was twisted, and his skin was intact, not at all like ordinary people. Such a discovery made him feel even more like an anomaly on the planet at that time. He does not belong to this world. Only his parents would not dislike him and raise him to such an age. When the thoughts came to this, Clark. Kent raised his head and looked deeply at Endless. After much entanglement, he decided to talk to his new friend who had already witnessed his special place and told him about the troubles he had been buried deep in his heart. Talking and talking. Clark. Kent recalled his father's teachings. In a trance, he seemed to return to the farm of his hometown, remembering the creaking old windmills, the smell of freshly cut hay, and the warm spring breeze running through his hair. At that time, he spent most of his young life with his father in the wheat field. My father would often say, take your time, scatter a small amount of seed at a time, don't scatter them together, let them be buried evenly in the soil. 99. Give them enough space, that's the rule. Clark. Kent fell into the memories and said emotionally, Father knows that not all seeds can germinate, but he wants every seed to have a chance to grow. He once said that the same goes for people, some people thrive quickly and need extra care. Clark. Kent seemed unusually entangled before he planned to tell Endless everything about himself. But after making a decision and opening his mouth, he poured out many words that he had never spoken. These are the emotions he has been suppressing in his heart when he is alone and hiding outside the crowd. I was able to persevere because of the care of my family. Finish the last sentence. Clark. Only then did Kent come to his senses, and found that he seemed to have said a little too much, and the worry under his eyes came up again, and he took a deep look at Endless. He didn't know how the other party would react after listening to his story and what he was thinking. Will you be as scared as everyone else, or will you make mocking remarks? Not Clark. Kent is unwilling to give trust to others and speculate on them with malice. In fact, after everyone deeply understands the real him, their reactions are nothing more than these two. In addition to that, Clark Kent is also looking forward to, perhaps, my new friend can be different from others. The other side. Endless listened to Clark. After Kent's telling, there was some emotion. As an old farmer, Clark's adoptive father had more vision than many people had. No wonder the great superheart is so kind. Perhaps innate is a part, but the education of the day after tomorrow is obviously also important. If a despicable fellow can also have such a father and have a good upbringing, he may also become a righteous Superman. The mind settled. Endless put a kind gaze on the other party and stared at Clark seriously. Kent's eyes. Clark, I think your idea went astray. He said word by word sincerely, you are not a freak, but different, beyond ordinary people, you are smarter and stronger than anyone. Thank you. Clark. When Kent heard such words from other people for the first time, he felt the sincerity in Endless' sighs, and his heart couldn't help but warm. The corners of his mouth moved, and he felt that everything around him was starting to change at this moment. There is a lot to say. But 1,000 words turned into only one thank you. However, there are too many simple words. No thanks, I'm just telling the facts in my heart. Endless smiled lightly. If you want to change a person, you must first gain the trust of the other person. He has clearly gained the initial trust of Dakeo. Definitely, what Endless just said is indeed what he thinks. Those who reject the KO are not out of disgust, but simply because fear is powerful, but the KO's kindness gives others the opportunity to hurt him. That's right. The driver is still in the car. Then. Clark. Kent reacted, and in addition to him and Endless, there was also a driver in the cab. He hurried over and easily pulled open the car door, which appeared a little twisted by the impact, and rescued it. Fortunately, the front of the car is not the center of the impact, but it is only a little inevitably affected. The driver just passed out. The other side. Endless also called the police and the ambulance's emergency number. The police soon arrived. Oh my God, this. Is it what happened? When they saw the terrifying scene at the scene, all the policemen were surprised and felt extremely incredible. Everyone can't imagine what kind of car accident can make a truck like this. The impermanence of the world is always unpredictable, and we just happened to pass by here and found something so shocking. Endless said with an innocent face. In fact, he had already modified the driver's memory when he decided to call the police, and the other party would not remember the detailed process of the car accident. Clark on the side. Kent also heard Endless' words. It was immediately understood that this friend was covering for him and not exposing his ability. Immediately, the trust in Endless in his heart went to a higher level. Then. The police did not embarrass the two more, but simply made a brief record for them. Okay, there's nothing else, you can go back first. Endless. The policeman in front of them closed the transcript that had just been signed by the two and immediately laughed. Okay, then it's going to trouble the officer after that. Endless smiled in return. In the end, it didn't take much time from the time the police arrived at the scene to the time they finished taking notes. He and Clark. When Kent left, the ambulance arrived at the scene. The two walked all the way to the apartment where they were staying. Clark. Kent didn't show any more ability. Then. He seemed to remember something, and his face was worried. However, Endless, I think that if that driver wakes up in the future, I am afraid that there will still be trouble to find the door. 35. No, don't worry, I can guarantee that the driver recalled the scene at that time, not to mention other people. It is estimated that even when he thinks about it, he will wonder if he is crazy. When Endless heard his doubts, he did not reveal his ability, but just laughed. Okay. Get such an answer, Clark. Kent raised an eyebrow and sighed with a strange expression. I think you have a point. 359. Don't be too nervous. Endless laughed. And then he noticed Clark. The eyes behind Kent's glasses suddenly narrowed, and his body was a little stiff. What's wrong? Endless noticed the change in the other party, paused, and followed his gaze. I saw that downstairs in the apartment, several cars were parked outside, and the people in the cars looked a little familiar. Wait for the two to get closer. Da-da-da. Several cars opened their doors at the same time, and several strong people got out one after another. Whitney. 35. Clark. Kent looked at the other group of people standing at the front, and his expression began to gradually condense. I saw that person, it was Whitney. Just seen during the day, with Clark. Kent had a holiday and robbed his childhood sweetheart. Clark. Kent's gaze paused on the iron chain hand held by the other party, and his brows wrinkled deeper and deeper. Lee Dejo. Apparently, the comer is not good. In addition to him, the rest of the people who came with him, also carrying baseball bats, surrounded Endless and the two directly. Endless couldn't help but raise his eyebrows when he saw this scene. School bullying. The University of America still does this. But when he thought about it, it seemed to be true. Spider-Man encountered in college. The KO also encountered in the comics. Definitely. For the current situation, whether it is Endless or Clark, Kent doesn't feel any panic. After all, these guys in front of him look fierce and evil, but they are just young people. Endless and Clark. Kent can solve them with a random shot and effortless. Come to think of it, Endless couldn't help but look at Clark, whose face was already visibly gloomy to the extreme. Kent. In fact, Whitney, as his high school classmate, must have known the latter's specialness. But since the other party is in such a situation, he still dares to bully. That means that the previous Clark, Kent didn't make a move at all for fear of hurting others. Will you make a move this time? Endless Eyes suddenly looked forward to it. And while he was thinking about it, the opposite Whitney also walked not far in front of the two. Clark, I didn't expect to see you again in the Met. 35. Every time you annoying freak touches you, I feel sick from the bottom of my heart. Whitney gently shook the chain in her hand and looked up at Clark. Kent, with a gloomy expression on his face, even if the ghost doesn't disperse, I didn't expect you to be Lana's old acquaintance. Your dirty hands touched her feather today. I'm on fire. I always feel like I have to teach you a lesson and let you know that you, a freak, should stay away from her. Whitney was talking and kept asking Clark. Kent closer. However, he didn't notice. Clark. Kent's hand tightens in constantly. You guy. Clark. When Kent saw Whitney appear, he was already aware that the other party was not good. After all, when he was still in high school, the latter would find various reasons to trouble him. Definitely Clark. Kent usually doesn't choose to pay attention. I just thought that when I graduated, I wouldn't see him again. I didn't expect to meet each other after changing cities and schools. And it happened on the first day of school. On the lens in front of him, Whitney's gloomy and domineering face is reflected. Clark. Kent remembered the intimate appearance of him and Lana in the morning, and a haze flashed under his eyes. Why don't you speak? Whitney looked at Clark. Kent didn't say a word, suddenly became more and more proud, raised his hand and put the iron chain in his hand on his shoulder. HMPH, forget it, for the sake of my high school classmates, I don't want to make things too ugly. 99. As long as you promise me to stay away from Lana in the future, I will let you go. Clark. Kent was still silent, but the 5 fingers hanging at his side moved slightly. I hope you can understand something and quickly apologize for your previous behavior. Seeing this, Whitney became more and more impatient, and once again warned again, while sweeping his gaze towards Endless, otherwise, not only you, but also your friends will suffer. 39. Endless didn't care about his words when he dared to hit himself. After all, neither Whitney himself nor everyone who came with him was Endless' enemy. It's like a normally developed adult who doesn't take the hostility and threats of a 3-year-old child to heart, and even if he hears it, he will only feel ridiculous. No matter how these Joker-like characters jump in front of him, they don't deserve to be put in his eyes. Not to mention the mood swings that affect Endless. At the moment Endless just wants to see Clark in this period. Kent, how to deal with today's situation. It's a pity for Clark who has been silent for a long time. Kent's eyes narrowed, and his fingers, which had been slightly bent, suddenly relaxed. I'm not in the mood to bother with that. Having said that, he skimmed directly past Whitney towards the apartment building. Shit. What do you mean? Stop me, you freak. 99. Seeing that he was being ignored, Whitney twisted his brows, a little annoyed and angry, directly through the chain and pumped it fiercely at Clark. Kent's broad back. Syllable. The chains are broken and menacing. Which thinks Clark. Kent reacted extremely quickly, and without turning his head back, he just raised his hand, and directly received the other end of the chain into his hand. Damn. Whitney's face froze when he saw this, but it was how hard he pulled back with 517, and after the chain was straightened, it was difficult to shake half a minute. He felt that the other end of the chain was not Clark Kent, but connected to a mountain made of steel, is not at all pulled by its own human power. Even Whitney has exerted all his strength, but just Clark Kent's hand holding the chain did not waver in the slightest. You freak, let me go. Seeing this, Whitney inexplicably felt a wave of fear in his heart, and he remembered that the guy opposite him was called a freak because of his shocking strength. Just in the face of taunting Clark Kent will only choose to escape, which will make people like to bully him more and more. This feeling that the strong will not fight back if they are bullied by you makes people have the illusion that they are the strong. Whitney is also one of the members paralyzed by this feeling. So see you Clark today. Kent, but also crossed paths with his girlfriend. Without hesitation, he brought someone over, intending to repeat what he had done before. Both to warn and to experience that thrill again. But where did I think that the situation would become like this now? For a while, Whitney had a feeling that it was difficult to ride a tiger. I won't take the initiative to provoke anyone, and I hope no one will provoke me. 99. Lana and I have known each other since earlier days, and it's not your turn to point fingers. 99. Clark Kent turned back indifferently and spoke coldly. Ha! Actually started fighting back. Endless, who was standing next to him, watched this scene, his eyebrows raised, and his eyes revealed surprise. It seems that Clark Kent seems to have a bonus when facing a love enemy. It's just that he also found out. The prompt sound that copied ability just now did not sound. That is to say Clark. All this that Kent shot is just a basic operation, and it does not reach the scope of ability at all. However, Endless also feels normal when he thinks about it, a person full of muscles, even if he is not super able, his strength will not be bad. Then, Whitney, I remember you said before you came, this guy is a soft egg who can't raise his head. Why can't you even handle a nerd now? The friend of Whitney next to him looked at this scene playfully, squeezing his eyebrows. These words fell into Whitney's ears, and all the fears in his heart were immediately ignited into a fire of shame and anger. Fuck. Just watch how I get him. He cursed, let go of the chain, and backhanded a baseball bat from his friend. Roar. The baseball bat breaks through the air. Whitney gritted his teeth and grimaced, exerting all his strength. Didn't expect. Bang. Looks like Sven Crisp wearing glasses. Kent, casually throwing away the chain, raised the other hand, and caught this one again. Next second, his 5 fingers exerted strength and suddenly retracted. Bang! The baseball bat he took in his hand directly cracked and burst, turning into wood chips and scattering and splashing. Gollum! Whitney and his friends swallowed a mouthful of spit in unison when they saw this scene, their eyes stiff and straight, and their eyes full of shock. If they didn't all know it was a baseball bat made of solid hardwood, would definitely have thought Clark. What Kent cracked was nothing more than a dead branch that had been rotten for many years and broke when touched. On the side, Endless' mind finally sounded a cold prompt that made him smile slightly. Battle detected, drop reward, super strength, Superman. Meanwhile, get out of the way, don't let me see you again. Clark. Kent stood in the doorway of the apartment building, warning Whitney with a gloomy expression. Whitney, I don't think we still need to fight with this freak, the gain is not worth the loss. 99. I still have important things to attend to, so let's go first. Seeing this, several companions with Whitney directly chose to step back and walked away in ashes. After all, no matter what, these people are just 19 or 20-year-old young people, and no matter how arrogant they are on weekdays, they will be instigated when they really run into hard stubble. Damn. Clark, I tell you, today's business will not end like this. Actually, Whitney in Clark. When Kent pinched the baseball bat, he had already quietly retreated unconsciously. Noticing that his companions had run away, he immediately retreated. However, after running to the car, he still gave a hard warning. Then he drove away with his companions without stopping. Clark. Kent had been ignoring the taillights of several cars and disappeared at the end of the street, and the expression on his face slowly relaxed. Good job just now. Next to Endless because he saw Clark. Kent finally began to change, plus gained ability, was in a clearly good mood, and praised with a smile. Like you said, people always have to change. Besides, I can't let Whitney bully myself. Clark. Kent looked at each other and smiled too. He knew in his heart that he had just been able to make a completely different act of resistance from his previous style, except that things involved his favorite childhood sweetheart. More importantly, Endless's friend has recognized his existence. This makes Clark Kent learned that apart from his parents, there are people in the world who, after revealing their abilities, do not feel like freaks and do not reject themselves. Although Endless is currently alone, everyone else will stay away from him. To Clark. For Kent, it is no different from a redemption, the most important lifesaver for those who fall overboard. This bolstered his confidence to resist. Endless felt the other party's gaze, did not say more, and smiled softly. Then Clark Kent glanced at the time and raised his eyebrows. I didn't expect it to be here, I still have a part-time job in the restaurant in the afternoon. 5. Speaking, he looked at Endless. Endless, I have to go over first, and then go to the party that the senior said in the evening. Okay, you go get busy first. Endless nodded when he heard this. Then he stood in place and looked at Clark. Kent turned away, no, Ada, choosing to follow. I have already shaved wool on the other party twice today. Count the gangsters you meet when you go out in the morning. The day is not over, and there have been 3 incidents. Presumably, on his way to work, there should be no accidents, so that he has the opportunity to copy ability. If Clark really has that decay that it won't stop all day long, then I have nothing to say. Come to think of it. Endless smiled wordlessly, walked into the apartment building, and returned to his room. The mind moves. The panel opens. People panel, Endless. Ability, variant ability, small water control, born. Variant ability super self-healing factor, Wolverine. Variant ability super strength, Wolverine. Krypton Superman. Krypton super strength, Superman. Now I've gained 2 super strengths. From Wolverine and Dakeo, respectively. 35. Endless scanned the panel, looking at super strength from 2 different characters, and slowly clenched his fist thoughtfully. Feel your strength grown. His eyes moved, and he immediately rummaged through the room. A steel pipe the thickness of a thumb was quickly found from the room. Try the strength. Endless held the steel pipe in both hands, his eyes flickered and his heart moved slightly, and he suddenly increased the strength in his hand. Squeak. The result is a bending of a steel pipe that is even more difficult than bending a spaghetti. Moreover, I feel that my strength seems to be much greater than that of Wolverine and the Supermaster at this stage. Endless felt his strength grow by leaps and bounds, his face beamed, and at the same time he couldn't help thinking. He looked down at his arm. Now that he has gained 2 super strengths, his muscles have grown again. The figure is already faintly detached from slenderness and can be called well proportioned. In addition, because of the ability of the steel body, the density of Endless's body is also beyond ordinary people. Thinking. He went straight into the kit Endless and found a stainless steel fruit knife, the tip of which pressed on his arm, and stabbed lightly. Endless saw that the tip of the knife could not pierce his skin at all, and not even a white mark was born. He narrowed his eyes and began to increase the force on his hand. 2 points of force. As a result, the experiment had just begun, and the strength was only increased to 2 points, and the knife body in his hand could no longer hold on, and it was directly twisted into scrap iron at the tips of Endless's fingers. And on his skin, there is still no half a change. Not to mention the white seal, even the depression has not been born. It seems that although it is only from the steel body of the early super, the strength of the body's defense should not be underestimated. Endless raised his eyebrows. According to this point of view, unless it is a special armor-piercing bullet, different rifle bullets can't even hurt a single hair of my sweat. Excited to find out all the knives in the kit, he began to test the strength of various body parts. Until all the knives were scrap metal, Endless nodded with satisfaction. It seems that no matter which part, it has hardened a lot. He smiled and lifted his pants, making this conclusion. Thoughtful. Endless walked out of the kit. Returned to the bedroom, and stared at the white wall in front of him. He raised his fist and used 5% of his strength. Boom! The muffled clash of fists against the concrete walls made the entire apartment building tremble. And compared to the cracks that directly cracked, the iron body plus super strength is a completely combined improvement, which not only enhances the defense, but also increases the attack. Endless looked at the unharmed fist, and then at the wall in front of him, smiling. A new iron body's ability has been added, which completely increases the upper limit of his attack power. After all, no matter how strong the strength is, even if there is no upper limit, if the strength of your body cannot keep up, everything is delusional. Just like Endless before, even if he can punch through the steel, he himself will be injured. And now, he doesn't have to worry about these things at all. Just when Endless was in a good mood. Bang bang. Damn. Endless, what are you doing? Aren't you going to bring down the whole building? A fierce slamming sound came from outside the door, accompanied by the landlady's sharp scolding. Hey! Landlady, did I just move the furniture a little and disturb your rest? I'm really embarrassed. 99. Endless opened the door a little embarrassed, and his fingers touched his heart slightly. You. The landlady frowned, and was about to open her mouth to scold angrily, are you fooling the devil? Can there be such a big movement in moving furniture? As a result, in the next second, a sense of calm rose in her heart for no reason, calming down her excitement. At the same time, the landlady still felt that the beautiful Oriental teenager in front of her looked good, and she was suddenly reluctant to be angry. Instead, he said calmly, so it is. Okay, pay attention in the future, don't make such weird movements again. After saying that, she didn't stay any longer and turned to leave. Seeing this, Endless breathed a sigh of relief and returned to his room. Looking at the cracked walls on the wall, I immediately felt emotional. Being able to do this to this extent also represents Clark as the source of ability. The horror of Kent. Although the great superpower of this period is still in its infancy, its power is already extremely powerful. Just the body of steel plus super strength can compare to most of the existence in this universe. This is why the masters of each universe can become the strongest in the level universe. The KO is the most powerful existence that can be found on Earth at present. Even as long as I copy all of his abilities as a basis, plus other people's abilities, at that time, no matter in that universe, I will have the confidence to truly control my own destiny. The thought proceeds here. Endless slowly narrowed his eyes flickering. It seems to be thinking about future plans. The time soon came to evening. Unlike the evening in Gotham City, the metropolis sky is always pure blue, so the sky is shrouded in a layer of red at sunset. The entire city skyline is reflected in huge amounts of silhouettes, and pedestrians on the streets will not rush home. For the vast majority of people in the metropolis, their nightlife is very rich, and they will not be as oppressive / uncomfortable as Gotham. In other words, although there are many weirdos in the metropolis, there are very few madmen. It doesn't often happen that crazy people with high IQ commit things like sin. And at the moment, A party is also being held on the Metropolitan University's western campus, fading into the horizon as the sun sets. The cafeteria on the western campus is shrouded in colored lights. The arrival of the dark curtain also makes the lights appear more dazzling. Endless, in fact, I'm not very used to such occasions. Like I said before, I am not suitable for this world. On the road, Endless and Clark walked in front of the school gate in the direction of the West Campus. Clark on the side looked at the students coming and going, all with smiles on their faces, and felt that this scene was very lively. But this also made him feel out of place and uncomfortable. Clark, for you to make a change, you need to remember at all times that you are not a freak, that you are smarter and stronger than anyone else. 5. Endless was a little speechless in his heart. It seems that the super character of this period is really far from what he imagined. He is completely a big boy with a restrained and shy personality, and even some social fear. You know. Clark's eyes darkened a little, and he looked at the faces of all kinds of people passing by around him. Although Endless' appearance began to ease his repressed heart. But years of habit still make Clark feel that these passers-by will rush up in the next second, pointing at their noses and scolding freaks. Okay, take your time, a lot of changes can't be achieved overnight. As long as you can have a heart that starts to change, it's a good thing. 5. After Endless had the psychic ability, he found that even if he did not activate the ability, he could begin to detect other people's mood swings. Sensing Clark's emotional changes, he did not force a verbal offensive and repeatedly emphasized the importance of change. Instead, it is a relaxed choice of understanding and appeasement. Thank you. Clark once again threw a grateful look at his new friend, but he also became much more relaxed. Endless smiled. He felt he was slowly becoming a master of psychology. Then, a figure in the back came up and patted them on the back. Hey, what a coincidence! If you can come to this party, then I can guarantee that you will not be disappointed. It was Bob who passionately hooked up on the shoulders of the two. Bob, they're your friends. Bob's accompanying female companion looked at Endless and Clark, and seemed to be quite satisfied with them. Erica, they're new, don't beat their minds. Bob noticed the emotions under his female companion's eyes and reminded a little speechlessly. Endless is not averse to enthusiastic seniors, and even finds it a little interesting. Perhaps experiencing college life in America for the first time, he found that the people in this country are really open. Just bitter Clark. It was indeed the first time he faced such a battle, and he was smiling awkwardly the whole time, and he was at a loss for what to say. It was only when he finally arrived at the restaurant that he was relieved. The students in the student union have converted this place into a temporary venue. Don't look at the restaurant, in fact, this place is really not bad at all. Bob walked in the front and habitually introduced the two. Between talks, several people had already entered the restaurant, and the moment they opened the door, the endless light inside shone out, and the brilliant lights on the ceiling reflected in the face. Music with strong drums churns through the field, and countless carefully dressed men and women are soaked in it, and their bodies sway rhythmically. This place is just perfect. The corners of Bob's mouth rose and couldn't help but sigh. It happens every year, but the elderly can also participate. 99. Endless found that many people with mature faces can be judged by their words and deeds. Apparently there will be a lot of old students coming to join in tonight. The spacious restaurant that used to come during the day is now filled with people, and the crowds are gathered together. Clark, don't be so restrained. Endless noticed the tall Clark beside him. His expression was a little restrained, and the light on his face obviously made him a little uncomfortable. I'm just not used to it. 35. Clarify said with a deep breath and wiping the sweat from his forehead. Don't be nervous, there are still many links in a while. 35. Bob spoke. At this time, there was a burst of joy around Raw, and I saw that on the makeshift stage in the center of the hall. Tonight's host finally appeared, walked to the center and beckoned to everyone below. Countless people cheered Raw loudly in an enthusiastic atmosphere. Wait until the party is over, and everyone will vote to choose the best king and queen on the field. It's been an old part of the years, and I think it's interesting. Bob on the side seemed to be unable to stop. Still patiently explained to Endless and the two, the most important part before the end later. Clark, I think you'll have to find a female companion. Endless bowed his head and teased. Actually, I'm not very good at dancing. Clark shrugged his shoulders a little helplessly, his eyes unconsciously searching for Lana's figure in the crowd. Soon he found the familiar shadow. Lana, who had been facing away from him, seemed to notice the hot gaze, and couldn't help but turn her head to look at it. When he found out it was Clark who smiled at the latter. Only then Clark received a warning from the eyes of Whitney next to him, and the guy seemed to have forgotten the morning's events, and his eyes were eager to smash Clark to pieces. You'd better teach Whitney a lesson, this guy doesn't look like he's growing in the slightest. Endless also noticed this scene and said back. Forget it, I don't want Lana to be sad. Clark said in a deep voice. He didn't think he was a good man or would be a great saint. I just think that he shouldn't arbitrarily destroy other people's feelings. Endless looked at the big boy in front of him a little helplessly, and knew without thinking that the other party might have misunderstood, not letting him rob someone. Just let him teach Whitney a lesson. But it seems normal for Clark to think so. Just thinking. Endless' expression suddenly froze, and then his brows furrowed as if he felt a trace of strangeness. It was after gaining the ability of the professor's mind, his perception of danger before he was able to smell some unusual atmosphere in advance. Now, however, that feeling is getting stronger. The sense of crisis is getting stronger. It was a strong reaction from the head. 1. What could be the danger? It's a Met University, and it's still partying. Endless eyes look at every corner as far as he can reach, and at the same time, he also releases mental fluctuations, like a huge amount of web intertwined and covering the vicinity, detecting the hearts of everyone nearby. For him, anyone with evil thoughts will be perceived wrong. It seems like someone is approaching. And Clark, who was standing next to him, also noticed something strange and squinted slightly to look around. Then everything in front of him began to change, and through the bodies of the people around him, he directly saw through everything in the entire hall. All the sights fell into his eyes. There is no. Then only outside. Clark's eyes narrowed slightly again, the obstacles in front of him became more transparent, and the scene in front of him became outside the restaurant. Moment. He saw a suspicious target, and a figure was standing sneakily outside the gate. The figure looks extremely thin, but it gives people a strange feeling. Battle detected, get supervision, Superman. Sighed. Endless' mind also sounded the voice of being rewarded, and after hearing it, he knew that Clark had also found an anomaly. And it is possible that the enemy has already been found. As a matter of fact, Endless had also found the location of the enemy, and when his psychic fluctuations enveloped the vicinity, everyone's thoughts were known to him. Endless, I have something to go out. Clark lowered his voice and didn't say what he was going to do. It's just that his voice has not fallen. Boom. The originally closed door of the restaurant was slammed open, but someone outside the door kicked open with extremely terrifying force. Huge amounts of power directly lifted the door into the air, and even the cracks around the door frame were born. What's even more terrifying is that everyone clearly felt that the entire building where the restaurant was located just now trembled fiercely. Damn! What's going on? Was it an earthquake just now? How can it be so terrifying? Time. The men and women who were still immersed in music and drink hormones before were suddenly frightened by this one. Countless pairs of eyes widened in horror and looked towards the door. On stage, the host, who had been stirring up the atmosphere of his passionate speech, was also shaken in place by the sudden movement, and then frowned and cast his gaze towards the gate. Shit! What tricks are these idle scum playing again this year? As one of the initiators of the party, he felt extremely angry and cursed in a low voice. It can be said that almost every year at this time, someone comes to the orientation party to make trouble. After all, people of this age like to find a sense of existence. Except for him. There were also many elderly people who had experienced many orientation parties, and they also thought of this place. Damn, there are always some uninteresting guys who try to show their difference at a time like this. 99. It's more disgusting than flies in the toilet. They also cursed angrily. 0. Asking for flowers. 0. Right at this time. In the night outside the entrance of the restaurant, a figure wearing a blue sweatshirt, with his head bowed and most of his face covered by a hood, slowly approached. Is it you guy who wants to ruin my party? The host stared at him coldly. You should know what you did. You are not welcome here. If you're interested, I advise you to apologize and get out. In the middle of his talk, several people in the audience were upset because the party was disturbed, and the boys with strong physique also walked out of the crowd with gloomy faces. Not welcome to me. Ha ha ha, I'm not welcome. Ridiculous, ridiculous. Ha ha ha. Then, after the figure at the door heard the host's words, he couldn't help but muttered and repeated the other party's words, and then his shoulders trembled and laughed. Everyone couldn't help but frown when they saw his reaction. So a madman. It's really a shame, even if you are disturbed by such people. Get out of here, don't open your eyes, boy. Some boys with strong blood, after seeing that there was only one person on the other side, couldn't help but try to behave in front of other girls, and stepped forward to scold the people at the door. Something is wrong. However, Endless stood in the crowd and couldn't help but squint his eyes when he looked at each other. He felt the murderous aura emanating from the other party, and he was very sensitive to these with telepathy. In the face of so many people, they can exude such a strong murderous aura. I am afraid that even if the other party is just an ordinary person, launching a frenzy will have a lot of impact. And Endless faintly felt that the person at the door was not ordinary. Clark also noticed something strange, and looked worriedly at Lana, who was closer to the door. His body slowly tensed, and his feet moved unconsciously. Be ready to save people at any time. Then, the figure at the door suddenly stopped laughing maniacally, and his tone suddenly roared fiercely. Many years ago, you treated me as a joke. Now, it's time to pay it back. The voice just fell. Bang! The waiting in the venue was instantly dark. What did he do? Maniac. Maniac. A moment of darkness, coupled with the rendering of the crazy tone of the person at the door, everyone present gave birth to a slight panic for a while. I seem to know who this guy is. Meantime, Endless, who had always maintained his composure, narrowed his eyes slightly, and his thoughts moved slightly. He had just been trying to find the corresponding role in his mind. Although the characters in this universe will change somewhat, Endless still found the role of the guy at the door. That's Jeremy. A poor worm who has been ostracized everywhere in his college career. Is one of Superman's villains. I remember this guy was a psychic with the power of lightning. 35. Endless thought. Then, at the door, several relatively strong boys had already walked towards Jeremy. Hey, looks like we're just going to let us throw you out. The boys were rubbing their fists, constantly thinking about the images of the female voices worshipping them behind them while talking. The next second. Snap. 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 Densely wrapped in terrifying energy, like the scorching arc of thousands of white snakes dancing wildly, it suddenly erupted from Jeremy's body. Instantly enveloped those few people. No one can throw me out anymore. 35. The electric light was fleeting, and Jeremy spoke in a deep voice, and at the same time walked towards the hall. And the boys around him had turned into several charred corpses lying at his feet smoking white smoke. Damn. This guy is a monster. It's a monster. Run. Come on. 99. Mom. Mom. Seeing this scene, the men and women in the hall were immediately terrified, watching Jeremy getting closer and closer, only to feel that Death God was coming, and panicked and wanted to escape. However, I found that the doors and windows were locked at some point. No. With this discovery, someone suddenly let out a miserable scream. And when Clark saw Jeremy release lightning, the whole person froze in place, incredible to the extreme. Because, he is still other than himself, so. People who are different and have ability. He suddenly felt extremely complicated, excited, surprised, dazed, and both. However, before Clark could think more, his thoughts were pulled back by Lana's startled roar. Looking at Lana standing in front of the crowd, it was the few people closest to Jeremy. Clark's face became gloomy, and he lowered his voice and said to Endless, "I'm going to make a move." Looks like he had to fully release his abilities, even if he revealed his identity, because he couldn't watch Lana and other alumni die. Thinking, Clark's eyes solemnly locked on Jeremy. "You people." Jeremy walked forward without hurrying, his eyes swept over the panicked faces one by one, raised his head and hooked a smile on the corner of his mouth, and the blue arc in his eyes jumped. "Weren't you happy just now? Crystal?" 5 at parties, on the dance floor, writhing and dancing, exuding something called youth. Self-confidence, wantonness, freedom, these things seem to belong to you by birth. Between talks. Jeremy raised his hand, and a blue arc danced between his fingers, and I, who was rejected by you at the beginning, can only hide in the corner and cry sadly, and no one cares. 9. But look now. What are you afraid of? You're afraid of me. The voice fell. Z-snap. Suddenly, another dense arc of electricity erupted from Jeremy, the body wrapped under the sweater. A blue arc of electricity shone, illuminating his already somewhat distorted face hidden under his hood. 35. At the same time, several extremely painful screams sounded. Poof. in the dull sound of falling to the ground. Jellamy's eyes continued to look at the frightened crowd indifferently, not caring at all that there were a few more flashes of electric current at his feet, and the people who were burned to the ground could not afford it. You used to make me miserable, and today, I want to let you taste my taste 100 times over. You said yes, George. The last word came out of his mouth. Snap. A terrifying arc of electricity flashed on Jellamy's body again. And George, the host of the party who felt his gaze, took 2 steps back in horror, but his feet were soft but he sat directly on the ground. You. Who are you? George felt the hostility rushing towards him, his brain was blank, and the other party seemed to know. And hated the 17th of May himself. But no matter what, he couldn't remember when he had provoked such a monster. Ha! Seeing George's reaction like this, Jellamy let out a low laugh in his throat, as if to laugh at himself. You see, you've always been so high, you've forgotten that you rejected those people in the first place. He continued to take a step and approached the crowd. If God hadn't made me awakening my current ability, I'm afraid. In the end, you don't care about the people you've hurt, right? Ha! You told you, I'm not qualified to party. So I said. You are not entitled to live. Snap. Snap. The blue arc on Jerome's body beat again, and the blue light emitted illuminated the crowd in front of him who could not retreat and were tightly clustered together. At the same time, it also illuminated the faces of horror and distorted despair. Damn. Damn it. The people by the window smashed the sealed window in front of them, and as a result, there was no construction work at all, and the window was sealed too dead. As Jeremy approached, there was less and less room for the crowd to step back. These men and women were all standing around them at the moment, and there was not even room to squat, but all of them felt that they were surrounded by a bottomless abyss. Whitney, what to do? What should we do? In the crowd. Lana grabbed Whitney's arm deadly, her pretty face was already covered with tears of fear, her body trembled, and the 6 gods were masterless. However, Whitney himself could not say a word, his face was pale and his eyes were wooden, and he was terrified. They did not expect that such a thing would happen on the first day of school. Or at a grand orientation party. Where do I run? Where do I run? Whitney is usually arrogant and hardly puts anyone in his eyes, but now he is afraid of it. Desperately looking left and right, looking for a way out, but there was no way to do anything, and there was darkness all around. Others, almost the same, reacted. Despair, powerlessness, panic. It seems that at this moment, it condenses into substance and flows among these ordinary students. Jerome, this guy, because he has suffered school violence before, his mentality is distorted, and then because of the sudden awakening ability, his mentality is distorted. Do you want revenge? Endless sighs were indifferent, staring at Jerome, who was gradually going crazy, and judged, and this twisted revenge is not only aimed at those who have bullied him, but also spreads to everyone else who participates in the party. While thinking, Endless' 5 fingers flipped, and a subtle arc also flashed between his fingers. He has copied Jellamy's ability. However, since Clark has decided to do it, let it be left to him. 99. It just so happens that I can copy his ability a little more. Thinking of this, Endless smiled. He also felt that Clark next to him was already on the verge of breaking out at any time, and the latter's eyes were staring at the distance between Jellamy and Lana, getting closer and closer. Then. You guys. It will all be a gift to my new life. 55. Jellamy, who had been giving a speech before, suddenly stopped his steps and raised his arms with a wild smile on his face. Snap! Compared with the terrifying electric energy that was several times more powerful than before, it suddenly condensed into a dense arc and dispersed towards the crowd in front of him. If there is no accident, the people present will be killed by him in an instant. However, rumble. Everyone in the restaurant suddenly felt that all the air currents in the space were violently pulled, turning into a storm that rushed towards the door out of thin air. A sharp explosion sounded in his ears. Saw. In the dark hall, an extremely fast figure burst out, grabbing Jeremy and knocking him out of the gate before the electricity burst out of his body. Soon the two disappeared from everyone's sight. Everyone froze in place, startled. Just now everything happened between electric light and stone fire, too fast. The ordinary people present couldn't react at all, and they couldn't even understand what had just happened for a while. Who was that person just now? Lana also stood stunned in place, her eyes straightening as she looked at the empty gate. She clearly felt just now that the figure that burst out passed by her. After a while. Only then did Whitney and the others come to their senses, looking around and seeing no Jeremy, if it weren't for the scorched black marks on the ground and the broken door. They may even feel like the other has never been there. Shit. Why is that guy discharging gone? I just felt Death God kissing me on the cheek. 99. Dead people are injured. Call the police. Call the emergency number. 9. Then, looking at the charred bodies on the ground, these college men and women began to react differently. Some are still immersed in the impact just now, unable to extricate themselves. Others are still afraid. More people began to reassure each other, contact the police and schools, and first responders. Baby, are you all right? 35. Whitney took a deep breath, her pale face regained a bit of blood, and began to hug Lana and whisper comfort. Standing behind the crowd, Endless smiled a little helplessly. Battle detected, get super speed, Superman. Battle detected, get mutant lightning, Jeremy. The cold prompt that had just sounded in my head echoed in my ears. There is also an extra ability in the body at this time. That's right. The figure that flashed out just now was Clark. Sure enough, Clark deserves to have an innate righteousness, even if he takes risks, he wants to save people. 5. Thinking. Endless hurriedly walked to the door of the restaurant, ready to follow out. Endless. Lana recognized Endless and set out to follow him. Because she had just looked around and did not see Clark's figure, she was worried. Baby, where are you going? Seeing this, Whitney pulled her, and her face suddenly looked a little ugly. Go find Clark. Lana was a little displeased, and she casually replied without replying, and ran out, leaving a gloomy Whitney staring at her back. However, didn't Endless just go out? How did it disappear so soon? After Lana walked out of the restaurant, she looked left and right but found that Endless could not be seen anywhere. Wondered. But more of a concern and eagerness for Clark. There was no other way but to look around. Meanwhile, some distance further out of the West Campus cafeteria, there is an undeveloped forest that is unmonitored and sparsely populated. Boom! There was an extremely heavy muffled sound of landing. Jeremy fell to the ground with his back on his back, grinning his teeth. And in front of him, Clark, who was tall and burly, was looking at each other with complicated faces. This was the first time he had seen someone with a different and special ability besides himself. It turns out that he is not the only freak on this planet. Suddenly, the loneliness in Clark's heart inexplicably disappeared, most of it. Damn. Then, on the ground, Holomi cursed, slightly embarrassed, and got up with his hands on the ground. Even if you want to stop me. He scolded at Clark and clenched his fists as soon as he stood up. Next second, the dense arc of dazzling light suddenly beat wildly on his fist, and the blue electric light dispelled the darkness within several meters of the surroundings. Under the electric light, you can also see Jelemy, his face twisted and fierce, and his eyes are full of anger. He roared and punched. Boom! A punch blasted out. As a result, Clark stretched out a large hand and easily grabbed Jelemy's fist wrapped around a terrifying arc. Snap! 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 The arc on Jelemy's fist was strong, and the endless electric current suddenly filled Clark's body, spreading along the ground, and endless thunder light filled the entire Space Zero. And Clark endured all this. His eyes still did not change, and he did not even frown a minute. Those arcs that constantly shine on his body do not seem to exist, and they cannot affect him at all. He just twisted his brow and looked at Jelemy. Damn. You're awakening too. What are your powers? Why help them? Jelemy looked at the scene in front of him, and finally returned to the gods from the experience of the gods who had just descended like gods and could control the fate of mortals at will. Only then did he realize that when Clark brought him out of the restaurant, he reacted that the other party was actually a stranger. It's just that Jelemy is too emotional, plus the speed with which Clark brought him out is too fast. So much so that he was a second slower to react. You'd better stop before there are no casualties, or you'll never be able to turn back. If you continue like this, everyone else will reject you and you won't be able to continue to gain a foothold in the crowd. Clark did not answer the other person's words directly, but opened his mouth to admonish. He finally met an alien like himself, and did not want the other party to embark on a road of no return. Showing strength will make others repel, so don't show it. When Jelemy heard Clark's words, he raised his eyebrows, as if he had heard some big joke. You are too real. Don't you realize that the rules of this world are always made by the strong? Can't get a foothold in the crowd. Who cares about that kind of stuff? Who is going to gain a foothold in the crowd? I don't want to stand in a crowd. I'm going to have everyone around me, all afraid of me. Kneel me all. Submit to. Seeing that Jelemy's voice became louder and louder, his emotions became more and more excited. Clark's brows furrowed gradually. And neither of them noticed that in the forest not far away, Endless had been standing under the tree watching all this. You. Clark listened to Jelemy's crazy words, his face was ugly, and he opened his mouth to continue persuading. You better forget it. Waste. 9. Which thinks. Jelemy didn't want to talk to him anymore, his eyes widened in anger, and a dazzling electric light erupted on one leg, and he suddenly raised his leg and kicked at the other party. Electric light is all over the sky. Oh. Seeing this, Clark sighed helplessly. Boom. The big hand suddenly pressed on Jelemy's chest, and all the electric light was blasted away by him at this moment, and the whole person flew out upside down. It crashed directly into a tree more than 10 meters away. The trunk trembled violently, shaking and falling leaves, and Jelemy slid down the trunk to the ground. Your ability. Much better than me. He stood up with difficulty against the trunk of the tree, his face was pale, and he only felt that just now, he seemed to be loaded on the head by the truck, and his whole body hurt. "You'd better kill me, or I'll make you regret it for the rest of your life." However, Jomi still raised his head, stared at Clark's slightly tangled face, and said with a smile. From the conversation just now, he expected that the big man opposite him was simply a giant beast that shackled himself 3.0, and he didn't know the value of his strength. This kind of guy can't kill him. Clark. Just while talking. With a raw call, Endless' figure came out of the forest and walked just to the side of Jerome. Endless. Seeing this, Clark's pupils shrank sharply and his heart hung. Jerome couldn't do anything about him at all, but facing Endless was different. "Stay away from him, danger." Clark visibly panicked. After all, he knew that the other party had followed him because he was worried about him, or he was one of the few people who could be called friends. So he immediately shouted a reminder towards Endless, and at the same time prepared to rush over and take him away. And Jerome noticed this and immediately threw himself at Endless without hesitation. "You know, these ordinary people are no different from ants in our eyes." He shouted raw and threw his fists, and his fists were full of electricity. However, Endless saw this scene and the corners of his mouth outlined an imperceptible arc. Next second. Syllable. A palm with slender fingers and sharp bones had easily pinched Jereme's neck. Whether it is a body of steel, or the same lightning ability. Let the arc on the latter's body not hurt Endless in the slightest. Damn! How is it a monster again? Jerome roared inwardly, and his heart contracted. This reaction fell into Endless' size, as funny as Joker. "Clark, this is the first lesson," he thought. "Start slowly tightening your fingers." Endless. Clark, who was originally going to leave to save Endless, was stunned when he saw this scene. "You." Under the moonlight like water, the night breeze rustles through the rolled leaves. Jerome lifted his feet off the ground, his hideous eyes sticking out, endured the feeling of suffocation, and struggled to break free from the hands around his neck. It's a pity that no matter how much he struggles and exerts his strength, it will not help at all. Endless completely ignored his electric shock power, and the hand around his neck was like an extremely strong iron pincer, and he was not shaken. "Endless, you." Clark saw that Endless could easily take the attack of an alien who was full of electric current, and his heart shook. He was a little surprised. Could it be that Endless is also a special existence? But just a step has been taken. Opposite side. Jerome suddenly noticed that the yellow-skinned boy on the other side looked at him, as if he was looking at Deadman, and his eyes were full of killing intent. Suddenly his body stiffened, like a cold body in an ice cellar, and he instantly felt the great terror between life and death, swallowing himself. At the same time, Jerome felt the 5 fingers pinched around his neck, slowly retracting. He immediately gave up the struggle and tried his best to cry out for mercy. "No." Click. Who thought I just had time to export a word? Endless' hand suddenly tightened, directly crushing Jereme's neck and even the trickle belt cervical vertebrae. The body of the latter, which was held in Endless' hand, suddenly softened, and his limbs hung down like noodles. It was as if it had lost its life. "Endless, what are you doing?" Clark was stunned when he saw that Endless actually killed people directly, and did not hesitation. In a trance, the beautiful face in my mind that took a day to take shape, giving people warmth and understanding, with a smile, gradually blurred. It's not that he hasn't seen the murderer. but Clark never imagined that one day, among his friends, there would be such a person. Bang! Next second, Jellamy's body was thrown to the ground. Clark was pulled back to reality by the muffled sound of his landing. He sought prestige. I saw Jomi's face bleeding and lifeless, and he was still frozen with the extremely frightened expression before death, and his eyes were wide and full of horror. As for the neck has been twisted out of shape. Clark looked at the corpse of Jello 03 meters on the ground that began to quickly chill, and his expression suddenly darkened. Why are you doing this? He turned his head and asked Endless in a cold voice. He obviously still has a chance to save it. Endless was not surprised by Clark's words. After all, except for the most evildoers, most of the universe's superpowers would not kill people easily. He looked back at the latter, his eyes calm and unwavering. He just wanted to kill me, and I can only kill him. Besides, when a fox enters the chicken coop, then killing the fox is the best option. After all, it came to speculate this time, then it will definitely be next time, because that is the nature of foxes. Clark was slightly stunned when he heard this. I wanted to refute but felt that what Endless said was very reasonable, and I didn't know what to say for a while. He clenched his fists and realized another problem. Endless has just shown extraordinary strength. Other words, he also has superpowers. Just like Jellamy and himself. Thoughts fall. Clark was just about to open his mouth to question Endless' ability. Why did he hide it from himself before? Then, Clark, where are you? Across from them in the distance of a forest, Raw shouted. It's Lana's. She couldn't find Endless and Clark, and she became more and more worried, so she found it all the way. This matter is not over. Clark glanced at Endless when he heard this, and took the words back to his mouth. And he didn't want Lana to see Jellamy's body, so he didn't say more, just hurried towards Lana's location with a hazy look in his eyes. The other side. The expression on Endless' face never fluctuated in the slightest. Clark's reaction was all within his control. Thinking, Endless glanced at Jellamy's corpse on the ground. The reason why he chose to kill Jomi was to stir Clark's emotions. It looks like it's working. Endless smiled lightly, looked at Clark's obviously excited back, and stepped up to keep up. Now that he's got a lot of abilities, he'll get all of them soon. So at this moment, Endless had a bold idea in his mind. To replicate all of his abilities as quickly as possible, instead of waiting for him to trigger the event immediately, I should talk directly to Clark. The efficiency of obtaining ability in this way will be much higher. As he walked, he thought, with the ability I have now, I can fully support me to do this. Thoughtful. Clark in front of him was already in Lana's field of vision. Hey, Clark. How did you get so far? As soon as Lana saw Clark, she immediately stood on tiptoe and waved excitedly, and then trotted towards the latter. I just thought the party was a little stuffy, so I came out and walked around. Clark looked at the girl who was worried about him, his heart warmed, and he tried to calm his tone. It's okay if it's okay, it's okay if it's okay. Lana had been in a state of tension and worry before, but when she finally saw Clark, she was happy and didn't pay much attention. I just feel that the whole person is suddenly relaxed. What's wrong? Clark asked knowingly. When Lana heard this, she remembered the desperate experience at the party before, and her body couldn't help shaking. At the party, something happened. You can just go over and look at it. After a pause, she then asked, by the way, what about Endless? I followed him out, and in a blink of an eye he was gone. When Clark heard the question behind, his face sank, and he didn't want to say more. "I'm here, and I just came to look for Clark." 95. At this time, Endless followed with a smile. "It's okay." Lana smiled even more. Clark's expression became more solemn, and his words became less. Subsequently, the three of them returned to the restaurant where the party was being held. At the moment, the entire building, including the restaurant, remained silent in darkness. According to the staff in charge of rushing to repair the circuit system, it seems that because of the strong electric current, the entire building's circuits have burned out, and if you want to power on again, you have to reinstall all the circuits. The students at the previous party had already walked out of the cafeteria and gathered in front of the building to be chaotic. It seems that many people are still immersed in the previous fears. Cries and screams came one after another. There were also a few people who had suffered electric shocks and were seriously injured, still lying on the ground and fainting at the moment. As for the restaurant where the party was held, it has been sealed, but looking through the doorway, you can still see the broken door and the scorched black floor. Clark looked at the chaotic scene, his face gloomy. What was supposed to be a pleasant party has now turned into a farce tragedy. "Do you still think that person is innocent?" Seeing this, Endless walked to his side and asked calmly. Clark was lost in thought. Although Jeremy was a victim before, this is not an excuse for him to hurt innocent people. Then, the ambulance, which was called by the emergency phone, also arrived at the scene. Clark looked at the person being carried away by the ambulance, did not know how to answer Endless' question, and fell silent. In the end, the party can only end in tragedy. The people at the scene also returned home one after another after making a record with the police. Next morning, Metropolitan University soccer field. Endless and Clark both came to the football team assembly to report as previously agreed with Coach John. But to Endless' amusement, Clark seemed to have left for school an hour early so as not to meet him when he went out with him. However, in the end, the two came here to meet as promised, and did not avoid it after all. "I'm glad you two can come." Coach John saw that Endless and Clark had complied with the agreement, and his face was full of smiles. His gaze couldn't help but scan back and forth on Clark several times. Definitely. As a popular sport in America, there are many enthusiasts, and the freshmen who choose to join the team after the start of school are not only Endless, but also other new students. "You are welcome to join our rugby team." After Coach John and Endless finished playing raw, they immediately returned to a serious look. After all, as a coach, it is impossible to be easygoing all the time, and it is difficult to lead a good team if so. He first asked all the players of the team to introduce themselves. He continued, "Now as future teammates, you already know each other's names." 35. But as future members, this understanding is not enough, we need to know how capable your body can be. This way you can train better in the future. Coach John then announced the next physical test. There are 3 events: bench press, round trip, and standing jump. At the same time, new team members and old team members are also arranged to take a physical test together. Endless noticed a slight smile on Coach John's mouth when he said this. The intention of the latter was immediately understood. The first purpose of physical testing is to conduct a physical survey of these new members. Placing new players with old players means that you want the new players to recognize the gap before and after training. Definitely. Coach John's intentions are also obvious. Not only did Endless notice the latter point, but many other new team members also picked up their energy after hearing his words. So let's get started. Coach John took the reaction of the boys under his eyes, smiled lightly, and took them directly to the place of physical testing. Start bench pressing. Coach John got everyone ready and started at the same time, adding weight little by little. At first, the painting style was normal. Most of the new players, as the weight of the bench press increases, although their performance can be said to be far beyond their peers, but they are gradually exhausted before the old players. Then, Coach John suddenly found that in addition to his favorite Clark, the yellow-skinned boy named Endless also persevered to the end. Could it be that I have lost my eyes? He was secretly surprised and couldn't help but start to doubt. Definitely, everything is still within the normal range. Then, with everyone else, including the veterans, reaching the limit when the training session ended, the style of painting began to change abruptly. Are the two of them still continuing? Is it an illusion? How do you feel that Clark, with Endless, seems to be in a competition? Everyone stood aside, looking at Endless and Clark, who were still increasing the weight of the bench press, with strange expressions. Coach John, including Coach, widened their eyes in amazement. Right under the gaze of these people, Endless and Clark added bench press weight to the limit of this age group before stopping. It's incredible. Everyone was secretly terrified. And Coach John, in addition to surprise, is more joyful. He picked up 2 pieces of treasure. Since then, after the first bench press of the physical test, Endless and Clark have already frightened the entire football team. And then the round trip of the second item stunned everyone's jaws. When other people run, whether fast or slow, they are just excellent in the ordinary range. Endless and Clark directly raised their results to the point of being infinitely close to the world record. It's the best in the country. What kind of monster is this? HMPH. When Clark heard Coach John stammered that his round-trip running result was 0.01 seconds better than the previous day, he was visibly unhappy. He had known to use more force, but he was mainly worried that ability would be exposed. Otherwise just this switchback run. He can run countless times, just endless, it is impossible to keep up with him. This Clark. Endless watched the other party's mood change from the sidelines, and it felt funny to raise his eyebrows. It is reasonable to say that Clark should know in his heart that the performance in the physical test is just a disguise, and does not represent their true strength. It is also impossible to directly expose the strength just because of individual testing. But when Endless sensed that the other party was trying to compete with him 5-1-7, he also came to play and played with the other party. More importantly, Endless needs Clark to be angry with himself in his heart. Next. Under all the jaw-dropping gazes, Endless and Clark broke the Mets record in the last test, the standing long jump. Snap. Good. Awesome. Endless. And Clark. No matter who is too strong. 35. Under the leadership of Coach John, the other new and old players applauded excitedly. Generally speaking, when people face people who are a little better than themselves, they will be somewhat jealous and unwilling. But when the gap between the two before existence is large enough to be crossable, there is no other emotion except reverence. And at the moment, the rest of the football team, for Endless and Clark, felt that way. Coach John even looked at the physical test results of the two and was amazed. This is the best athlete physical test result I've ever seen as a coach. When he spoke, his voice trembled with excitement. At the same time, I can't help but imagine that with Endless and Clark, their football team will kill all sides in the future college league. However, if he knew that in fact, both of them were deliberately suppressing, it is estimated that the worldview would be subverted. The physical test is over. Everyone recalled the process of physical testing and sighed. When they left, they both greeted Endless and Raw warmly. Not for long. Inside the dressing room, only Endless was left to take a shower, change his clothes and prepare to leave. However, just as he was about to go out, he was suddenly blocked by Clark, who blocked him with a gloomy expression. "I know what you're asking, follow me." Endless glanced at Clark, who had a gloomy expression, and immediately spoke. Clark didn't say anything more and turned sideways. This fledgling boy is still annoyed by yesterday's incident, but he doesn't know how to deal with it. After all, he can't kill Endless to apologize. The mistakes made by the other party are not monstrous crimes. Again, he cherishes this friend and does not want the other party to go astray. So Clark was wondering how to get his friend lost. The two then left Met. Endless took Clark to a more remote place, where there were no houses around and trees everywhere. The silt trails in the forest are overgrown with weeds, and apparently few people come here. "What did you take me to do this?" Clark looked around at the sparsely inhabited clearing and asked in a deep voice. Endless looked at him and smiled slightly. "There are few people here, and it will not hurt the innocent." 5. Hearsay. Clark on the opposite side had a complicated expression and suddenly clenched his fists. "I have heard people do not like the name Endless, so suggest names in the comments and like the ones you guys like the most. Also tell me some translation errors in the format of this. Problem, Clark.Kent, fix, Clark Kent. If we reach top 20 I will go through every chapter and hand fix problems. I highly doubt it will happen. Underscore 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 underscore. There are few people here, and it will not hurt the innocent. When Endless said this, he smiled and spoke in a calm tone, as if he was telling an unimportant thing. It's just inexplicable. When these words blurted out, the surrounding noisy wind and rustling leaves suddenly stopped. As the winter evening approached, the already cold temperature seemed to drop a little more, and it was chilling. The slanting sun stains the clouds of half the sky, the woods, the clearing, two teenagers standing opposite each other. Everything has clearly not changed at all, but it is stained with a sense of slaughter. What do you mean? When Clark heard the other party's words, he squinted slightly, his eyes flashing. What did you come to me for? Endless did not choose to answer directly, and asked rhetorically with a smile on his face. I want you to apologize for yesterday's incident. Clark was wearing glasses, and the look in his eyes behind the black frames was serious. People are dead, do you want to send me down to apologize to him? The smile on Endless' face was even greater. I have to say that today's the KO is really young, and his words and deeds reveal a certain simple taste, but it is precisely because of this that he is only sad because of a freak from others. Endless, you don't realize your mistake at all. Obviously you have extraordinary ability, but you are doing three indiscriminate things. It's hard for me to accept such a thing. Clark spoke in a deep voice, looking at the teenager in front of him with a smile, his brows furrowed deeper and deeper. He has to admit that his new friend has a beautiful face that no one will dislike when he sees it, especially when he brings a smile, which can give people a feeling of trust and trust. It's just that he was such a person last night, but his face did not change when he pinched Jomi to death, as if what he did was not killing at all, but did something as ordinary as shaking off the dust on his clothes. Instead of holding grudges or hatred, or kill people with other strong negative emotions, killing people like endless complete indifference, which makes Clark shudder. You still can't see the facts. Some people don't deserve salvation. 39. Endless shook his head, as if he had a headache. Why can't you figure it out? If I don't kill Jeremy, he will definitely kill more people in the future. Maybe what I did at that time was indeed to kill people, but the purpose was to save more people. There is an old saying in our East, killing to save life is just that. 39. Maybe you think you should create a world where no one gets hurt, but that only exists in ideals. You know, this is reality, Clark. There are guys, he just damn it. After speaking, he glanced up at Clark and found that the other party's expression did not waver in the slightest, and the helplessness under his eyes was even heavier. Yes, this guy is a stunned young man. However, it is precisely because of this character that it will be carried out after choosing to adhere to absolute justice. But the current situation is not a good thing for Endless, who wants to change Dakao as soon as possible. The other side. Clark really took Endless' heartfelt words as fallacies, took a deep breath, and his eyes suddenly became more and more determined. Endless, I am your friend, I have given you the trust that belongs to me. He looked at Endless seriously, so I won't let my friends fall. I'm going to take you to the police station to turn yourself in. You're naive, Clark. Endless smiled bitterly when he heard this. How can you be sure that I won't escape again? Speaking of this, he paused, and his tone was ridiculous. As long as you kill me, you can get rid of it once and for all. I can get you in again. Clark said in a deep voice. Hear this? Endless couldn't help but raise an eyebrow. He remembered that in many comic works, the KO generally chose to arrest the villain in prison. After all, for him, the villain escaped and could still be easily caught. Unless, in the face of killing one to save 10,000, the KO will choose to kill the killer. That's why he chose to let Luther go. In other words, anyone, standing in his place, will choose to kill Luther. Endless pondered. Clark had already walked up to him. Let's go, I'll take you to the police station, you need to reflect on your mistakes inside. Clark said, already stretching out two big hands to clasp Endless' shoulders, and then exerted force. And then his eyes flickered, his pupils contracted, and he showed shock. Since he was a child, he has never encountered such a situation. Although sad because he was called a freak and ostracized, Clark also had a certain confidence in his own strength. Including for Endless. Even if he knew that Endless was also a stranger with extraordinary strength. But Clark still feels that in terms of strength, the other party will not be his opponent. You're still too weak. Endless saw Clark hesitate, raised his eyes and said lightly. It's not that he belittles the KO, but it is. In front of Endless today, Clark at this time is still half weaker than the former in terms of strength. Because his abilities are superimposed on each other. Today, on the basis of having Wolverine super strength, he has added the power in front of him. That's why Clark couldn't shake Endless. Endless is stronger than him in strength. But Clark currently has a point, Endless can't compare for the time being. That is his unique Kryptonian bloodline. Endless could clearly feel that the power that Dakeo exerted on his shoulders was not as strong as his own. But the gap between the two is closing at a subtle pace. In other words, the super strength that Endless has now is yesterday's Clark plus Wolverine. And Clark's power today has grown compared to yesterday. Endless estimates that it will not take long for the other party to have the power to surpass the current self. As long as the sun shines, he can always get stronger. Kryptonian bloodline is really terrifying. Endless noticed this, and finally some fluctuations under his eyes. I don't know if I can copy the bloodline, he thought. One of today's goals is to try. Impossible. Jack looked at Endless, who was exerted by his own strength but was unmoved, and the shock under his eyes became more and more intense. While he whispered, he gradually increased the strength in his hand. Endless remained still. Clark's eyes fluctuated more and more obviously, and the force increased faster and faster. Rumble. Until the force exerted on Endless' shoulders had reached several tons, it was completely enough to crush ordinary people into meat puree. And the ground under the feet of the two people showed slight cracks, and the surrounding land under their feet was affected by the increasing strength. However, Endless was still unmoved, and the whole person was like a sculpture, without the slightest wavering. Nothing is impossible. Endless chuckled softly at Clark's astonished gaze. The voice did not fall. Syllable. His hand was already on Clark's hand, and he suddenly exerted force, and the latter's muscles also tensed and burst into strength. Outcome. Clark's hand was broken up little by Endless without resistance. Rumble. As the two of them increased their strength, the ground was already covered with wisps of cracks, and the deeper the gap became, the denser the number. Countless animals nearby sensed danger, and fled from all corners in panic. This. Clark looked at his hand being held by Endless, and his eyes jumped wide at the corners of his eyes. At this moment, all the muscles on his arm have swelled up, the lines are fierce, and the dense blood vessels are constantly beating under the skin. Clark thought he had used all his strength. But Ra was like this, his hand was so broken by Endless, even if he struggled, he couldn't press it again. However, just as Clark was horrified. Next second, Endless' other hand suddenly clenched into a fist. Syllable. Between the 5 fingers, the air in the palm of the palm was compressed to the extreme and suddenly exploded, creating a terrifying explosion. Rumble. Immediately afterwards, Endless threw a punch, and the speed was extremely fast. Even the air around him was pulled by this punch, and in an instant, the direction of his punch suddenly flowed. Boom! With a muffled sound, the punch had already landed on Clark's abdomen, and the huge force suddenly passed into his body, frantically tearing his internal organs. Under the severe pain, Clark was directly blasted back several steps by this punch. And those air currents that were pulled by Endless shouting, after he hit Clark, had just formed a violent wind to sweep up the dust. So, the wind blew violently in the direction where Clark retreated. Damn it! Clark clutched his abdomen, braving the dusty wind, his clothes hunting, barely standing. He felt the pain in his abdomen churning for a long time since he was a child, and the shock in his eyes could not be dissipated for a long time. Too weak, Clark, 35. Endless looked at him with this shocked look, shook his head slightly, and made sarcastic remarks. He was just going to provoke Clark today and force him to make a move. Damn. Old. I won't leave you alone no matter what. Successive shocks, plus taunts. Clark, a good man in the past, finally ignited anger in his heart, and gritted his teeth after speaking. He threw himself straight forward and counterattacked with a punch. Rumble. Clark punched out and pulled the airflow again, before the fierce wind that was still whistling at him raw was actually blowing backwards towards Endless with his movements. Clark. Are you angry? Seeing this, the corners of Endless' mouth slightly hooked up a smile, and he also chose to swing his fist to meet it. Rumble. The two broke out at the same time, super speed, their bodies burst out, and their fists collided instantly, emitting a terrifying buzz. Messy and powerful air turbulence. In an instant, from the place where the fists of the two collided, it swept out towards the surroundings, directly wrapping all the dust and rubble around the two to form a circle, and roared outward. All the surrounding trees were swept by this circle of airflow, and the leaves swayed violently. Boom! Meanwhile, the dust on the surface was also lifted, and endless dust and fog filled the air, and under the influence of the hissing wind, it rolled up, like a rolling dust and fog tide. The clash between two strangers with super strength, and the power that erupted between their gestures is far from what normal people can imagine. Their physical fitness has long surpassed ordinary people, I don't know how many times. This can't be. Feeling the power coming from his arm, Clark muttered again. It's just that he can't tell the bottom of his heart whether it's anger or joy, or both. Because he saw a person exactly like himself. Not enough, far from enough. Clark, you're still too weak now. Seeing this, Endless still shook his head. Come, develop your potential. The voice did not fall. He had already raised his fist and slammed it into the opponent's abdomen. This punch was even more powerful and faster, and even pulled out the afterimage of the Dao Dao in the air. Boom! Clark, who had not yet had much combat experience, was caught off guard and was hit by a punch again. Endless' fist shook with great force, pulling a strong airflow to form a violent wind, blowing towards Clark. Clark's abdomen was hit hard again, and even raw sucked suddenly. Before the severe pain could spread in the body, the whole person had already risen from the ground, bent over, and flew upside down like a cannonball. Rumble. The bushes behind him were washed away, and then Clark flew out of 10 meters by inertia and hit a large tree surrounded by 3 people. Big trees sway, trunks burst and debris fly. Clark landed on the ground, and after a few rolls, he barely lay on the ground. Damn! Roar, roar! He stood up embarrassed with both hands, cursing and gasping, because his abdomen had been hit hard, Lee Dejo, continuously, and his eyes were already bloodshot and red, densely covered with blood. Clark felt that when facing Endless, there was a complete feeling of strength and nowhere to go. He knew that although the other party was stronger, the gap between the two sides had not yet reached this point. There is only one reason why he has no backhand, that is, he is too bad in combat experience. Thinking of this, Clark looked up suddenly. Right now. He suddenly noticed a high-speed movement breaking the sky in his ears, and when he looked up, he saw that Endless had already burst in front of him. You're too weak. Endless shook his head and seemed a little disappointed, and the words followed his foot and kicked Clark the chest. Super strength exploded in an instant. The majestic power was frantically poured into the latter's body along this foot. Even Clark's steel blessed with an unusually dense skeleton is a little shape-shifting. Rumble. There was a bang. Clark was kicked away again by this kick. Between the sharp pain in his chest, he only felt that the scenery around him was turning into afterimages and rapidly retreating. Boom. 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 The whole person was ejected like a missile, and Clark couldn't even count it, and everywhere he went, countless trees were blasted, and endless wind and neighing feathers were swept out. The dust and fog that covered the sky soon shrouded in front of him, and I only felt that my back was bombarded by gravity. Countless tree fragments fell, and he also hit the ground due to inertia, setting off dust and mist and debris to stop time. A long narrow ditch appears among the trees. Thinking, he sighed. Then the pile of rocks where Clark was buried suddenly burst open and the rubble splattered. Clark crawled out of it embarrassed and collapsed to the ground. Raw. He lay on his back and looked at the sky, gasping for breath, and his chest rose and fell violently. Clark was furious. Unprecedented anger. Not simply anger at Endless, but emotions about his own strength. The only sense of powerlessness in this life seemed to suppress all the insistence he had previously placed in his heart at this moment. I'm not the strongest, nor the only one. After thinking, Clark turned over and put his hands on the ground, unable to get up for a long time. He wasn't injured, he wasn't physically exhausted. Instead, he lacked a thought in his heart to support him. Stand up. Clark, 35. Are you trash? Endless sensed Clark's emotions. In the midst of dazedness, loneliness, and disappointment, the wrapped emotions are actually all anger. As the person who knows the potential of the other party best, Endless immediately opened his mouth to provoke the other party. The voice fell. Clark on the opposite side was already clenching his fists. Are you a freak? Or waste? 35. Endless knew that the anger in his heart was getting deeper and deeper, and he spoke again. Stand up for me. Get out of the way for me. Here. Clark only felt a strong emotion, frantically churning in his heart, throwing his head up and roaring. His eyes suddenly glowed red, his neck burst out, and his fists pressed his fingers deeply into the ground. Next moment, the red light in his eyes became more and more dazzling. The surrounding temperature seems to be rising, and the endless heat wave is boiling and expanding. The madness rages throughout the surrounding space. Rumble. 2 crimson beams of light burst out, straight to the blazing energy of the sky. The red pillar of light was like a pillar of light that rushed straight into the sky, completely supporting the entire heaven and earth, and in a trance seemed to occupy half of the sky. Dye half the sky red. Clark completely exploded. Rumble. Endless terrifying energy power erupts, terrifying. Clark only felt that the emotions he had suppressed to the extreme in his heart finally found an outlet to vent at this time, and the whole person was like a volcano that had been brewing for years and finally erupted. 2 red beams of light wrapped in terrifying power, from his eyes, straight into the sky. The red beam of light that runs through the sky is as mighty as a long rainbow, and you can't look at it directly. The sky that appeared red in the evening within a few kilometers was directly reflected in crimson. The sea of clouds was also torn open, the big hole in the avenue, rolling endlessly. Then Clark's mood finally calmed down a little, and his heart began to tilt a little panicked. This is the first time he has used heat sight, so he is defenseless about what is happening now. But the beam of light bursting out of the eyes is like a suppressed emotion in the heart, like a torrent pouring out. Rounds of invisible, rolling heat waves churned and dispersed in the air, and the 100-meter radius around Clark seemed to turn into an oven at this time, and the air was distorted. Battle detected, rewarded, Superman. Endless also raised his eyebrows when he looked at the prospect, and the voice of receiving a reward immediately sounded in his mind. Another gain, he murmured, raising an eyebrow at Clark. Endless sensed the pain and doubts of the other party, realizing that the latter was using heat sight for the first time. It seems that his actions just now finally worked, not in vain. Smoothly helped Clark force out his potential. Phew. Then, the two pillars of red light that connected heaven and earth finally began to slowly weaken and gradually disappear. The terrifying coercion that filled the surrounding space slowly faded. Clark's eyes darkened, but eventually regained calm, and steam drifted from the corners of his eyes with the wind. Heat sight. He lowered his eyes, whispered in a deep voice, and began to come back to his senses to understand that he had inspired another ability. Furthermore, Clark also found that his strength, after the catharsis just now, actually gained a terrifying enhancement again. In the past life, he actually knew that his strength was gradually increasing. But there has never been such an exaggerated leap forward as at the moment. Clark's current state can be described as a step up, and it is not an exaggeration. Meanwhile, he raised his palm and clearly found that at the moment, he could also sense an invisible force between heaven and earth flowing between his fingers. This is magnetic field. Clark's eyes lit up. In addition to the heat sight and the increase in strength, I also felt the presence of the magnetic field. That is, I can now fly by attracting the magnetic field. Perhaps, now that I can. The thought is not lost. He jerked his head up and stared at Endless with a twinkle in his eyes. Next second. Rumble. The ground where Clark was originally located exploded into a deep pit. His whole person even carried a strong wind, rushed towards Endless, directly stretched out his big hand to clasp the latter's shoulder, and flew deep into the woods. Where the two figures passed, countless trees were washed away and wood chips flew. Blah blah. During flight, Clark grabbed Endless' shoulder with one hand, and frantically punched the latter with the other. Fierce and terrifying currents continued to surge out from where both sides passed, and all the surrounding trees were shaken by the wind and the leaves were falling. After the enlightenment just now, he was sure that his strength had suddenly risen and jumped above Endless. In addition to developing the heat sight, all the abilities of the whole person have also been strengthening, and have they also learned flight? Endless resisted the surging falling fist and clearly realized this. His expression immediately became excited, and he secretly marveled in his heart. Clark really deserves to be a superb, just an enlightenment, can improve such a great power. This is his unusual Kryptonian bloodline. It is also worthy of being the first naturally born fetus on Krypton in such a long time. Battle detected, reward, flight, Superman. Battle detected, rewarded, creature stance, Superman. Just when Endless secretly lamented the horror of Clark's Kryptonian bloodline, the cold prompt sound from copy ability sounded in his mind again. Flight and the bio stand. He felt that he had two more abilities, and his eyes lit up. This ability means that you will be freed from the shackles of the earth and completely increase all the upper limits of combat or action. No doubt. The combination of flight and bio stance is one of the most practical abilities for anyone. Clark, you really surprised me so much. I'll just say that going straight to you is probably the best way to do ability. 99. Boom. Endless thought with a smile as he blocked Clark's two falling punches in succession. However, since I've been fighting for so long, it's my turn to fight back now. Next second. Endless' face froze. Syllable. Both hands clenched Clark's falling fists. Although the current Clark has surpassed Endless in strength, it is far from reaching the level where one hand is stronger than the strength of the latter's two hands. Followed by, seeing that his arm was controlled, Clark's eyes narrowed slightly and frowned, but then his eyes instantly widened, and his handsome face was illuminated with a layer of red light at the same time. How is it possible? He looked at Endless, whose eyes were glowing red in front of him, and he was shocked in his heart. Endless' previous strength was stronger than his own. The new ability he just inspired, how could Endless be? When Clark saw this scene, his pupils shook wildly, and his eyes were full of incomprehension. Rumble. Unfortunately, I didn't wait for Clark to come up with any answer. Two rays of red beams exuding majestic power burst out from Endless' eyes. Terrifying heat waves. Those two huge amounts of red energy beams, like torrents of agitation, exuded earth-shattering power, roaring and bombarding Clark's chest. I have to say, Clark, who had just been awakening, became the first person to taste the power of this move. He felt the blazing terrifying heat, pouring bombardment on himself, huge amounts of pain that made him can't help roar shouted. In addition, the power contained in it is also amazing. Clark was directly hit by this bombardment and froze, losing control and falling to the ground. Rumble. The whole ground shook because of his impact, as if welcoming a meteorite hitting the ground. The ground collapsed, and smashed a large area of woods. Thick dust and fog rose into the sky, like wolf smoke. Why? Clutching his chest, Clark slowly stood up, shook his head full of sand, and looked up at Endless, who was floating in the air. His eyes were full of shock. He reacted with hindsight. Endless is not just simply having super ability, but the other party's ability is exactly the same as his. Whether it's power, or heat sight, or floating in the terrifying flight ability. It's just like your own replica. Clark looked at Endless, who was stranded in midair and looking down at him, and frowned to ask what was going on. However, as soon as he opened his mouth, he didn't have time to speak. Rumble. Just in midair, Endless' figure suddenly blurred. In the endless strong air current, he flashed in front of Clark in an instant. The latter did not have time to react. Has been violently and terrifying by Endless' eruption, and hit it fiercely. Rumble. Clark's body was as if he had been bombarded head-on by a 10,000 ton mountain, and he was directly knocked out of the air. Boom. The whole person smashed into the mountain not far away again. I saw it in the blink of an eye. Because of Clark's impact, that mountain instantly spread out dense cracks. Meanwhile, there are countless pieces of earth and rubble, collapsing from the mountain, thick dust and fog rising into the sky, constantly rolling around, directly covering the surrounding area of several kilometers. The ground shook violently, as if an extremely terrifying earthquake had occurred, and huge cracks that were deep and invisible spread out. Endless. You tell me. Why? Clark, who was trapped deep in the mountain, suddenly flew out and waved his big hand. Suddenly, a huge amount of airflow was pulled by him and flowed to one side, driving the surrounding air to form a violent wind. The huge dust and fog that occupied thousands of miles were easily blown away by this gust of wind, and all the trees in the surrounding woods were blown by the strong wind, shaking continuously. And Endless also appeared in front of Clark again. The latter saw that his expression had calmed down, as if everything that happened now was in his plan. Clark's anger grew stronger. He felt that this teenager, whom he only met yesterday, not only did not hesitate to kill the killer when facing the enemy. And there are many secrets to hide from yourself. This kind of concealment between friends made Clark very unhappy. Including him, he also realized that from the beginning, Endless seemed to have some purpose, deliberately provoking himself. However, after fighting him again, he inspired a new ability, and at the same time, his strength was also increased to a level. Endless. You tell me. Who the hell are you? Clark twisted his brows and asked in a loud voice. Then. Next second. Rumble. Clark suddenly exerted force, and the crumbling mountain under his feet, which was already full of cracks, burst directly. He instantly crossed a distance of thousands of meters and burst in front of Endless. Doubts welled up constantly, as if adding fuel to the fire, pouring the anger in Clark's heart more and more. He is ready to teach Endless, the boy, a good lesson, dig up the other party's secrets, and finally put him in prison to reflect his mistakes. Rumble. Thoughts flashed like lightning. Clark's power also suddenly exploded at this time. The super strength that has evolved is directly stimulated by him to the extreme. When a punch is blasted out, even a round of sound barriers faintly appears on the fist surface. Because of this, when Clark hit Endless, the latter hadn't even heard tearing air sounds. At the same time, even if he saw Clark punching clearly, he couldn't react at all. Rumble. Endless was hit hard by a punch, huge amounts of power, he felt raw sucker stagnation, his body shook. The whole person instantly flew upside down, and in an instant, it slammed into the body of a rising mountain in the distance. 0, asking for flowers. 0. Thundered. Suddenly, a mountain instantly cracked out of dense cracks under the impact of the terrifying power carried by Endless' figure. Lose your shape and collapse with a bang. In the violent shaking sound that was stronger than before, the broken mountain turned into countless rock fragments and smashed down, shaking the mountain. One after another, the impact spread out, rolling up the dust and turning into dust and mist. But in an instant, it devours the surrounding trees. The terrifying cracks of the Dao cracked out on the ground. It's worthy of being superb, just slightly stimulated the potential, and it has grown to such a point. Endless bathed in the thick dust and fog around him, touching the location of the chest hit by Clark, and muttered to himself. The clothes on his upper body exploded directly into pieces when he was hit by Clark. The smooth lines are not exaggerated, and each muscle, which is well proportioned and full, is exposed to the air. If you can get close, you will find that at the moment Endless has fair skin, but the skin on the chest is slightly red. Even if the Iron Man ability has been copied, there is still a faint pain in the place where it was hit. But think about it. Endless' mind suddenly had the story of Dakeo. He smiled and said to himself, after all, this guy can become an existence that cannot be solved by nuclear weapons in just 20 years. How can it not be terrifying? 35. Boom. Then. Outside the dust fog, Clark in midair waved his big hand, like unveiling a curtain, directly fanning out a violent wind, and the thick dust curtain in front of him was instantly blown away by the wind. He looked at Endless, who was standing on the ground with a smile, and his brows furrowed slightly. Now can you tell me who you really are? Next second. Clark gently landed not far in front of Endless, his eyes flickered and asked in a deep voice, why do you have the same ability as me? I can have anyone's ability as long as I want. Endless understood that he had extraordinary abilities, as long as he used ability, he couldn't hide it, so he just said directly. When Clark heard these words, he immediately understood the ability of the teenager in front of him. His emotional intelligence may be a little low, but his IQ is absolutely superb, and few people in the world can compare to him. Can you copy someone else's ability? Clark immediately thought of this, narrowed his eyes slightly, and said slowly in a deep voice. In that case, Endless, you need to control your power reasonably. After a pause, the expression on his face became more and more complicated. So far, Clark has understood that there are many people with super abilities in this world. Among them, if you want to talk about the strength of ability, then it is the teenager in front of you. After all, no matter what other people's ability is, no matter how strong it can become Endless' power. And among them, Valiant, Clark himself has fully tried. I have deeply experienced the horror of Endless ability. If your friend has been obsessed with ideas, then it will definitely become a threat to this world. The other side. Endless shook his head when he heard Clark's words. Clark, it seems that you are still living in a fairy tale. He smiled, his tone helpless. Endless, it seems that you don't plan to change your mind and are ready to go further and further down a wrong path. When Clark on the opposite side heard this, he suddenly clenched his fists, and his face looked extremely serious. Then I'll help you change it. He frowned and roared. The voice did not fall. Rumble. The entire ground shook suddenly, the air pressure changed greatly, the wind stirred, and the terrifying coercion suddenly filled the heavens and the earth. Clark moved. After his strength has been improved, his strength and speed at the moment have actually surpassed the current Endless. Oh, one by one. A sharp sound suddenly sounded in Endless' ears. He knew it was a sonic boom. Clark's burst speed has surpassed the speed of sound. And before the sonic boom sound was transmitted to Endless' ears, Clark's figure had already flashed in front of the former. At the same time, he also raised his fist and blasted at Endless. This punch also exceeded the speed of sound, and a sound barrier appeared on the fist surface when punching. With Endless' current reaction, he could barely see this punch clearly, but his body's reaction couldn't keep up with it. But he didn't panic at all, and even had a joy under his eyes. Because the voice of the reward in my head has already sounded. Battle detected, get. Boom. Clark's fist fell. Hit Endless hard. Endless' figure rose from the ground, was hammered off the ground again, and his whole life was smashed into another mountain that was still intact. Dust and fog fill the sky. However, Endless, buried in the rubble of the crash, the joy on his face became stronger. Even the excitement between the corners of the eyebrows and mouths on the entire face is indescribable. Just because, the prompt that just sounded in my head was Battle detected, reward, Kryptonian bloodline, Superman. That's it guys, hope you like this video. Like, share and subscribe the channel if you want more videos like this. Also tell me in the comment section down below if you have any recommendation about what I should make next. Thanks for watching.